All right, let's do a quick review of what we did yesterday in the yesterday's session. So yesterday we spent the entire session looking at various architectural best practices with respect to the Sentinel deployment, with respect to Sentinel service design consideration, with respect to various components that you will need to build and design as part of Sentinel end-to-end deployment. So we looked at best practices. We looked at a couple of sample workspace design architectures as well, based on the use cases that were available in the documentation. So we looked at how do we design a Sentinel environment for a client who has single tenant, multiple subscription environment. How do we design Sentinel for a client who has multi-tenant, multi-customer, multi-subscriptions environment? How do we deploy Sentinel for a client who is, who is present in multiple geographies, has offices, has teams which are present in those geographies, and they should only be able to see the specific data of that geography. So we looked at those use cases, and that gave us good insights in terms of how we need to deploy Sentinel, how we need to plan for Sentinel workspace and tenant architecture if we come across similar, situation in future when we are dealing with a client who intends to deploy Sentinel or migrate to Sentinel from an existing SIEM solution that client is using currently at on-premises. Then you will have the capability to suggest the appropriate architecture to the client by probing, by asking the right questions in terms of the environment that the client has, tenants and subscriptions that the client has, the requirements from the billing perspective, if there is any specific objectives that they have in mind, if there is any budget that they have, the objective with respect to what all data they want to collect and send to Sentinel, and how they want to optimize that data, all that comes into the architectural best practices that we discussed yesterday. So so I have also included the URLs that I included in yesterday's session, all of those URLs. I will be sharing this session transcript with you in the Google Drive so that you will have a fair idea in terms of at a very high level what all topics we covered on a specific day. And if you want to refer or revise those topics, you will have multiple session recordings, so you can directly get to the session transcript, look for the topic, you will see a date against the topic, and you can directly go to that specific session recording pertaining to that date. So that is how it will help you. Okay. So we have done the initial design. Let's assume that we are done with the design phase. We have we have a clear picture now. So now that we are done with the design phase, we actually have information on the following objectives. So we know the workspace architecture that we are now. Let's consider this lab environment. In this lab environment, we have a single workspace. So we'll go with a single workspace. So we have identified the workspace architecture, data sources. We know that we have data sources coming from, we have both Azure data sources and non-Azure data sources. Now, when it comes to non-Azure data sources, I'm actually referring to AWS because we don't have access to an on-premises environment. So we'll consider AWS as similar to an on-premises environment where we have a virtual machine that we onboarded the other day, where we have the AWS account that we onboarded. So that's what non-Azure data sources. So we have clarity on workspace architecture, we have clarity on data sources, we also have clarity on pricing. So when it comes to pricing, let's just assume that you have information that what is your daily, I'm saying, what is your expected daily log ingestion volume that you are currently expecting or anticipating. So you have information about daily log ingestion volume, and based on that volume, you have a tentative pricing also in your mind that, okay, I will be paying by the end of this month, I would expect to get this much of, bill from Sentinel service. And to separate Sentinel bill, what you have done, you have created the isolation, workspace isolation, wherein the workspace that is onboarded to Sentinel will not contain any other data sources. I would say it will only contain the data sources for Sentinel. It will not contain data sources for infrastructure monitoring. So you are creating that isolated workspace so that you will have good clarity on the daily log ingestion volume as well as the tentative pricing. And if it requires you to optimize this log ingestion volume, you can also do that without interrupting other businesses, other functions. So we have good clarity here. Data sources, we have clarity. Then we also need to have clarity on use cases in the sense that what are we going to monitor? Do we have some use cases in mind? Are we going to monitor for a specific event or a specific incident? So use case is basically events that we want to monitor for. That's what use cases are. So we have that basic idea on the use cases also, that these are the use cases that we want to monitor, right? And use cases would also involve automation. That if there is any initial activity that we would like Sentinel to take care of before our investigation team, before our forensic team gets involved. So if there is any firefighting strategy, any initial triage or initial decision or action that needs to be taken, that will be taken through automation. So we have that, we have those use cases in mind. So which basically means that now we are ready at this stage when we are done with our design phase. Now we are ready to enable. So my next step is enable Sentinel for the identified workspace or workspaces. So we need to enable Sentinel for my identified workspaces. That is my next step after doing all of this design discussions and taking a decision as part of design discussions. So let's go to Sentinel and let's go ahead and understand the Sentinel specific information. This was all we did yesterday was related to the design, related to the prerequisites. Let's understand Sentinel. So yesterday I spent some time and updated the presentation, which I typically use for Azure Security Services training, which includes Sentinel. Sentinel is one of the security service in Azure. Okay, great. Let's get started. Hope my presentation is visible. You all can see the slide. Okay, so we already have this knowledge. However, let's just quickly do a quick revision because now we are getting into Sentinel. So let's do a quick revision. So Microsoft Sentinel is a scalable cloud-native solution that provides both SIEM and SOAR capabilities. SIEM is security, information, and event management, and SOAR is security, orchestration, automation, and response. Now, Sentinel has both the capabilities. When you look at third-party solutions, you will find that they either have SIEM capability or SOAR capability. They do not have both the capabilities, and sometimes they need to integrate with another solution to provide for SOAR capabilities. SOAR is the automation part of it. So SIEM is where the solution is able to identify threats, incidents, probable misconfigurations, anomalies from the logs that it analyzes, and then it generates alerts and incidents. After that, it is the responsibility of the security team, security monitoring team, to investigate those alerts, incidents, and resolve them and identify the strategy going forward so something similar will not happen. Then comes the SOAR part. SOAR part is where you will probably want to put some automation. So when an alert is generated, an incident is created. The incident is sent to a specific team. Incident is sent to a distribution list or to an ITSM solution like ServiceNow, BMC Remedy. Or the incident will be initially triaged by the source solution. That's the automation part of it. So Microsoft Sentinel has both SIEM and SOAR capability. And it is also a cloud native SIEM solution. When I say cloud native, it basically means that Microsoft has built it from scratch and it is only available from Microsoft Cloud Portal. You don't have Sentinel service available from on-premises, or this service is available through marketplace on other cloud service providers. No, it's cloud native SIEM solution, and it's a first cloud native SIEM from a major public cloud service provider. Now, when it comes to AWS, Amazon Web Services, who are the pioneers of cloud computing, they started in 2006. Azure started in 2010. So they started 4 years before Microsoft Azure was conceptualized. Even today, AWS does not have a full-fledged SIEM and SOAR capabilities, a single solution that takes care of it. They use a combination of services to provide SIEM and SOAR capability. So when it comes to AWS, they primarily use AWS CloudWatch, AWS Lambda, AWS Config, AWS Inspector, AWS uh, Guard Duty, and AWS Detective. So collectively, all of these 5, 6 solutions, they collectively provide the SIEM and SOAR capability. Now, SOAR capability is very limited in AWS. So that's about AWS. Then comes the Google Cloud. Google Cloud, you basically have Chronicle. Now, Chronicle is a solution that they acquired. It's a third-party solution that Google acquired. And they have also acquired Mandiant. So using Chronicle and using Simplify, which is the SOAR capability in Chronicle, integrated with Chronicle, Google Cloud is able to provide SIEM and SOAR capability to its customers. So Google's product is also not cloud native. It's a third-party solution that they acquired, and then they basically integrated that solution in their cloud console, and the solution is available from Google Cloud platform. So that's about competition. And when it comes to third-party solutions like Alert Logic, QRadar, Splunk, FireEye, Securonix, most of the solutions that you will find, they will not have both SIEM and SOAR capability. Even if they have SOAR capability, it will be very limited. And they also are in the process of improvising, updating, as Microsoft Sentinel does. So the other good part of Microsoft Sentinel is that you will feel proud is how Sentinel has been rated by Gartner. Now, who Gartner is? So I would say for those who are not aware of what Gartner is an analyst firm, and they basically provide studies, they basically do research, and they provide the outcome of that research in the form of analysis, and they also come up with a magic quadrant. And this magic quadrant is the outcome of the analysis that they do. It's an extensive analysis that they do, and businesses across the globe trust Gartner for the insights that they provide as part of those analysis or magic quadrant. So if we want to see the magic quadrant of Gartner for SIEM solutions, let's see what that magic quadrant says. So Gartner magic quadrant for SIEM. You can type it in Google, and let's see the results. Okay, here we go. This is the magic quadrant of Gartner for last year, which is June 2022. Now it says June 2022, but this was finally released in somewhere in September, October. And the magic quadrant or the analysis. So Gartner releases magic quadrant every year, which means if somebody makes it to the leaders quadrant this year, and if they just relax and do nothing to improve these services, then there's a high probability that they will lose space in the leaders, quadrant. They may lose their, position, and they may find their position in some other lower quadrant. So service has to be optimized. It has to improvise every time, all the time. Then only they can continue to retain their position in Gartner's Magic Quadrant. Now, you will be surprised to see here that Microsoft Sentinel or Azure Cloud Native SIEM solution has been a leader. I'm saying this only happened in 2022. So in 2022, Microsoft Gartner recognized Microsoft Sentinel or Azure Sentinel. They until last year it used to be called as Azure Sentinel. So in the documentation, you will see Azure Sentinel reference, and you will also see Azure Sentinel old, references. But now it is known as Microsoft Sentinel. So Microsoft Sentinel has been termed as leader in Gartner's Magic Quadrant last year. IBM comes at second space, IBM Curadar. Splunk at third space. Securonics from Dell is at fourth space. And then Exam, then these are the challengers. Challengers means these are the companies which have the capability to be a leader, probably next year or probably sometimes in future. So we don't know what will be the Magic Quadrant in 2023 that we will get to see probably in August and September. But I am very confident of the fact that Microsoft will be able to retain its position in the Magic Quadrant this year also. So you see Logarithm, Rapid7, Fortinet, Devo, they are the challengers. They are the visionaries, which means they are the recent entrants. Sumo Logic, Elastic, Micro Focus, Gurukul, and Manage Engine, Logpoint, and UI, they are the niche players. Now, niche players are the company which have some specific capability in the product, which is not available in all the products. So this is how the Magic Quadrant is, that it has four quadrant: visionaries, typically the new entrants, niche players, challengers, and the leaders. Now you will feel bad the fact that ArcSight is not here. So ArcSight is not part of Gartner's Magic Quadrant in 2022. Probably it could be part of this quadrant in 2021, 2020, or it has never been able to get its space in Gartner's Magic Quadrant because it did not express or exhibit those capabilities that Gartner is looking forward to. So when Gartner creates this quadrant, as I said, it's an extensive study, analysis, research, surveys that it takes. Okay, so great. So this was acquired by Micro Focus, so it has a position, which means they are part of the visionaries. So probably if they are part of visionaries, very soon, if they may have the potential, I'm saying ArcSight may have the potentials to move into the challengers. If it, I'm saying this niche player category is something that I never recommend for a product, because when you become a niche product, then you also become typecasted for a specific industry vertical. Then you don't have the capability to become a leader. Leader is somebody who has its use cases for all the industries, for all the businesses, for all the problem statements. So there are pros and cons, because what I have seen in the cloud also, that the cloud service providers who had been in niche player quadrant, they have been in this player quadrant for a long time. They are just not moving to challengers and leaders. They will continue, they continue to remain in the same quadrant, because that's how Gartner is analyzing. Okay, so if you want to get to the details, I will say, if you want to see that what made Gartner put Microsoft Sentinel as leader in its quadrant, you will see the information here in the same documentation. I'm saying you can directly go to Gartner's this documentation, which says read the full report. So click on it. It will take you to the full report, wherein it will tell you in detail, in black and white, what made Gartner to decide that Microsoft Sentinel is the leader, or the other players, who basically got space in Gartner's Magic Quadrant. So you can say this document was revised in October 2022, and here you will get the information. So for each product, for each vendor, you will get some basic information, which is what that vendor is, since when they are in business, what is the strength, what are the good points, highlights of the vendor, and what are the lowlights. Cautions, initially they would say limitations, now they are saying cautions. So I would call it highlights and lowlights about that vendor. So similarly, you will see for all the vendors, Exaveem, Fortinet, Gurukul, UI, IBM QRadar, Logpoint, Logarithm, Manage Engine, Micro Focus. So Micro Focus ArcSight. You can see ArcSight is SIEM, UEBA, SOAR, and TIP functionality, and strengths and cautions of ArcSight. Then comes the Microsoft in the end. So Microsoft is also there. Microsoft is a leader. You can see now this is, yes, one of the challenge, which is where most of the architects are struggling with, because though Microsoft is now providing you great visibility in terms of insights, workspace insights, wherein it exactly tells you how much is the per day log ingestion volume, weekly log ingestion volume, monthly log ingestion volume. But there are times when clients find it a bit difficult, because if they go with pay as you go, then there's a challenge. They will end up paying more. If they go with a commitment plan, which is 100 GB, 200 GB, 300 GB. So I would say if Gartner is saying difficult to understand the true cost, it basically means that Gartner, spoke with industry experts to seek their feedback, who were using Microsoft Sentinel and who were planning to use Microsoft Sentinel, or who were not using Microsoft Sentinel, or who stopped using Microsoft Sentinel, all the categories. And Gartner finally got into this decision that yes, it is a bit difficult to understand the true cost. Potential for indirect vendor lock-in. This is another indirect vendor lock-in. Why? Because I'm saying when you are depending on Microsoft, it is not that you will only be using Sentinel. There's a high probability that you are a complete Microsoft shop. You're using Microsoft Defender for cloud. You're using Microsoft Defender for 365. You're using Azure Firewall. You're using Microsoft 365. You're using SharePoint, Dynamics. So there's a potential for indirect vendor lock-in and limited out-of-the-box content. So it says when compared with many of the other SIEM products, Sentinel is missing some of the out-of-box features, including compliance reporting. Why Sentinel is missing compliance reporting? Because compliance reporting is part of Microsoft Defender for cloud. That is where CSPM comes into the picture, and CSPM capability is with Microsoft Defender for cloud, not with Sentinel. However, clients have flexibility to create their own analytical content, which is less common across market space. Buyers should consider the additional expense of professional services required to support the delivery of their needs when evaluating the true cost. So yes, Sentinel is not that easy to deploy and configure. You would need an expert, a third party, an MSP, who would basically connect with you to understand and address the specific requirements that you have in mind and deploy the Sentinel accordingly. So those are some of the cautions with Microsoft Sentinel. Rest, it has great security. You can see it supports CASB, it supports identity, endpoint, network, OT security. And why Sentinel is a leader? Because most of the input services using which you can get a great visibility into your environment, they're already of Microsoft, like Azure Active Directory, Microsoft Defender for cloud, Microsoft 365 Defender. All of those services are good food for thought for Sentinel. So that's about Sentinel, which is great. I feel I take pride that Microsoft Sentinel is, has got placed in the leaders quadrant and is the leader when it comes to SIEM and SOAR solution. So I will look forward to the report from from Gartner for the current year, and if Sentinel is able to maintain its position, it will continue to maintain for the long term, because Microsoft is investing heavily, and I have seen Sentinel growing. I'm say this service was released in 2019. The service is only 4 years old, and in 4 years it has been able to suppress the leaders who had been there in the market for 20 years. I'm say QRadar, Splunk. So this service has a capability a potential to continue be a leader. So this was about the Gartner report. Let's go back to the documentation. Okay, now where do you deploy Sentinel? You deploy Sentinel in Azure tenant and accessed via Microsoft Azure portal. You can also deploy Sentinel or enable Sentinel through PowerShell, but at the end of the day, you will not have the capability to manage and monitor Sentinel because you have a very limited, CMD-lets available. CLI still does not have Sentinel capability. So it is the Azure portal through which you will manage and monitor Sentinel. Now, Microsoft Sentinel delivers intelligent security analytics, threat intelligence across the enterprise, which is true. So with Microsoft Sentinel, you get a single solution for attack detection. Now it has a single solution through which you can analyze. Sentinel analyzes the logs or data sources, logs from the data sources which are connected to Sentinel, and it visibility into potential threats. And then it also has tools available through which you can hunt for those threats and you can respond to those threats. And this is your bird's eye view across the enterprise, alleviating the stress of increasingly sophisticated attacks, increasing volumes of alerts and log resolution timeframe. This is great. In fact, Microsoft Sentinel has the incident management module, which means you don't need to stream incidents to a third-party ITSM solution and manage them there. You have the entire module available within the Sentinel through which you can manage all the incidents and you can maintain them in the long run. And the best part, it supports integration with Azure Lighthouse, which lets MSSPs to manage subscriptions, resources, log analytics, workspace services, and other services of their customers using their own Azure tenant subscription. So that's the another probability of Sentinel. So it's a multi-tenant solution. You can use the solution for multi-tenants of your organization, as well as act as a service provider for your end users and customers and manage the security for them also. That's what the capability is. Okay, more information is available on the Microsoft Sentinel documentation. Leave this part, you already have knowledge around this. Okay, now this is the most important part, the phases of Microsoft Sentinel. So the phases of Microsoft Sentinel, it starts with collection. I say the very first thing that you need to do is to enable the service. For sure, you need to design the service, and that part we are done. We are done with the design. We are done with service enabling also. We already have enabled the service for the workspace. We already have gone far and we have enabled the data connectors. We have deployed a couple of solutions from Content Hub. So that part we are done. Let's understand the life cycle of Sentinel. So after you are done with enabling all the data connectors, enabling all the log sources, now what Sentinel is doing? So Sentinel is collecting. Now Sentinel is collecting data at cloud scale across all users, devices, applications, and infrastructure, both on-premises and in multiple clouds. So we are collecting information across all users. All my Active Directory users sign-in logs, audit logs are coming. Devices, if I'm using Intune, if I'm using M365, E3 and E5 license, and if I am using Intune, I can also manage my devices. And those logs are also coming. In fact, with Azure Active Directory Premium P2, I can also manage the devices. So I can have my Azure AD registered devices, and only those devices will have access to the services that we define. So that option is also available here. So in collect phase, Sentinel is collecting data from all of the data sources that we have configured. Then comes the detect phase, which is the next phase with Sentinel. In the detect phase, it will analyze the data. It will analyze any potential threat, and it will minimize false positive, which means it will not unnecessarily create alerts thinking that it could be a threat. It minimizes false positives using Microsoft's analytics and unparalleled threat intelligence. So Microsoft Sentinel is also fed by Microsoft Threat Intelligence Suite. Microsoft has a threat intelligence engine in the backend, which is feeding Sentinel for the analysis, for the intelligence that it has. So it will detect, and how it detects is what we are going to focus today on. We are done with the collect phase. We are into detect phase now. Then comes investigate. So after it is detecting, after it is creating alerts and incident, after it has identified there could be a potential uh, threat to the environment, there is an incident, then it gives you tools to investigate the the threats or the incidents that it has detected. So you have tools available, you have hunting queries available, you have capabilities available into Sentinel, using which you can investigate threat with artificial intelligence, and so you have some automated capability available. It has the capability to present threats in in a view that you would like to see. You can see that into a plain text, information. You can also see into form of a graph. So that capability it has, and it all has come from the years of experience that Microsoft has with it, because Microsoft is not an entrant into the space. Microsoft has been into cybersecurity for a long time. And then in the end, the phase is respond. That how do we respond to incidents? If there are 200 incidents, will I be responding to each incident one after another? Do we have an automation scope? Can I have some automation inbuilt through which I can do the initial triage, I can do the initial response, or I can take the initial action? So that's what respond is, where Sentinel has built an orchestration and automation of common tasks. So these are the four phases of Sentinel. As we speak, we are in we are done with the collect phase. I hope all of you are getting the data that you need. Now we will get into the detect phase. So that's what we are going to do. And before we get into the detect phase, between collect and detect, we will need to configure what we want to detect. And it basically incorporates with Azure services like log analytics, which is the food for thought for Sentinel. So log analytics is the service that serves data to Sentinel, and Logic App is the service that enables the automation capabilities of Sentinel. So that's about Sentinel. Sentinel will enrich your investigation and detection with AI, artificial intelligence, and uh, as I said, it gets threat intelligence stream or feed from Microsoft Threat Intelligence Engine, which has information, which has most up-to-date information about potential threats that are looming on the internet. Okay. So then comes, so we are done with the features introduction of Microsoft Sentinel. If you want to get into the history, as I said, it was introduced in 2019. And since then, it has gone through a lot of improvements. And today, it has become a leader. I'm saying by last year, September, it became a leader in this segment. And trust me, Gartner's insights are honest insights. They are neutral insights, and it is not possible to influence Gartner or bribe Gartner to to have your product shown into leaders quadrant. It cannot be possible. I have not seen Gartner being influenced or Gartner being biased in the last, I'm saying, in the last 20 years, ever since I've been following Gartner. And Gartner is not only providing insights in this space. Gartner has its magic quadrant for almost all the technology categories. It has magic quadrant for cloud service providers also. It has magic quadrant for monitoring services. It has magic quadrant for firewalls. It has magic quadrant for CSPM solutions. It has magic quadrant for CASB solutions. It has magic quadrant for most of the technology solutions. And Gartner is one firm that has influenced the information security domain a lot. When Gartner comes up with a terminology, all the ISVs, service providers, they quickly get into action to align their product with the terminology or requirements that Gartner has put on the table. So all of the terminologies that you hear with respect to like these terminologies, CSPM, CWPP, CASB, SESI, EDR, most of these technologies, they are given by Gartner. So all of a sudden, Gartner says that we should have a CSPM solution. and Gartner defined that what a CSPM solution looks like. This study was published on in Gartner's website. Within 7 days, most of the ISVs, they were able to optimize their existing product, and they started marketing it as Gartner's recommended CSPM solution, or CSPM solution as per Gartner's recommendation. So it was the same product, they just had to include some additional capabilities as part of Gartner's, and then it became Gartner's recommended CSPM solution. So Gartner has a great influence in the technology industry, and that is why, as an architect or as a consultant, you should always refer or reference Gartner into your client-facing discussions and present information from Gartner, because there's a high probability that your client is also uh, is also a fan of Gartner. So this will really help you to push the discussion forward in the right direction. Okay. So what are my deployment prerequisites for Sentinel? Now this is for my participants who who have not worked with Sentinel in the past and who have only started learning Sentinel in training. So in order to deploy Sentinel, guys, we will need an Azure Active Directory tenant. Now, when you subscribe to Microsoft Azure as an individual, or when you sign up to Microsoft Azure as an enterprise, in both cases, you will get an Azure Active Directory tenant. To begin with, the tenant may be with a free license. If you are an individual, then the free license is also supported. And that is why you were able to deploy or enable Sentinel in your respective Azure sponsorship pass subscription, because you all have a free license. And then what we did, since we wanted to get some capabilities of Microsoft Azure Active Directory, we requested for a trial. And then we got Azure AD Premium P2, and we also onboarded some of our identities in Azure AD with Premium P1 and P2. So free license is also supported here. Then comes, in the tenant, you need an active subscription. Why you need an active subscription? So that you can track your resources creation and you can track the billing of it. So Microsoft Sentinel is enabled. I'm saying it's a non-regional service. It's a PaaS service, SaaS service from Microsoft, but you need a subscription to enable the service, because in that service you will enable the resource provider, which is Microsoft Security. Okay, then you need a user. These are the prerequisites, that you need a bare minimum this information before you deploy Sentinel, before you enable Sentinel. Then you need a user. Now this user could be a contributor or owner on the subscription in which you want to enable Sentinel. And Microsoft Sentinel also supports RBAC and table level RBAC, something that I shown you yesterday, that if you have a use case wherein your workspace is co-located, your workspace is shared between security team and monitoring team, and there are some overlapping data sources, your monitoring team also needs access to it, infrastructure monitoring team. So you can use table level RBAC to grant access to the infrastructure monitoring team. And table level RBAC will also be useful in a case when within your security monitoring team, you have different layers, different levels of engineers, and you don't want to expose everything to everyone. So you can use table level RBAC in that case also. Now, what exactly you need? So to enable Microsoft Sentinel, you need contributor permission to the subscription in which the Sentinel workspace resides. So wheresoever your workspace resides, in that subscription, you need contributor access to enable Sentinel. Once the Sentinel is enabled, then comes, how do you work with Sentinel? So if you want to work with Sentinel, if you want to use Sentinel, then you need either contributor or reader permission on the resource group that workspace belongs to. So to enable, you need contributor, and to work with Sentinel, you need contributor or reader. I will say, when I say work, it also means configuration. So for configuration, you need contributor access on the workspace, I say on the resource group that the workspace belongs to. Or if you want to use Sentinel, then you need reader permission. Now, either you need reader permission on the RG resource group in which the workspace resides, or the reader permission or the Sentinel specific RBAC that I showed you yesterday. So Sentinel also has a reader permission, Sentinel reader, and then Sentinel incident responder. So Sentinel also has its own RBAC. And to install or manage solutions in the Content Hub, you need template spec contributor. Now, this is service specific RBAC that you will need to install and manage solutions in the Content Hub. So typically what organizations do, they don't get into the nitty gritty of identity and access management because they trust their employees. This is where they go against the zero trust principle. And they typically give them subscription level RBAC instead of resource specific RBAC. Instead of providing users Sentinel reader RBAC, they will provide users reader access on the subscription to which Sentinel belongs to. And that way, those employees will be able to read and view all other resources also in the subscription, which is not a good practice. And when you are talking about managed services security provider, for example, DXC, when DXC manages Sentinel deployments for their customers, DXC will need to be very specific when DXC connects to the customer and request for access for DXC employees. You will need to request service specific RBAC because customer may not agree or may not be comfortable to give you contributor and reader permission on subscription where the Sentinel resides or on the workspace which is connected to the Sentinel. So be very specific. I'll talk about it in the Lighthouse part. Okay. A log analytics workspace, that's the next thing. So now that you have a tenant, you have a subscription, you have a user also. Now you need a workspace because in the workspace, you will store all the log data from various Microsoft and not Microsoft data sources that Microsoft Sentinel will be ingesting or will be analyzing and using it for its detection, analytics, and other features. So you need a workspace. And in the end, you should have good understanding on billing and pricing, which is very important because once you enable, once the logs are getting ingested, and if those logs remain in that log repository, log analytics workspace for a specific period of time, you will need to pay to Microsoft. There is no point of going back, back and forth. So you should have good understanding of pricing options. When it comes to pricing options, you have two pricing options basically, which is pay as you go, and the second is commitment tier. In pay as you go, based on the volume of data that you ingest, you will be paying. And in commitment tier, you will basically tell Microsoft that I have 100 GB of per day log ingestion. I will pay as per the 100 GB. So that's about the billing and pricing. So those are the prerequisites to deploy Sentinel. Now we have Sentinel deployed already. So I have also put reference. What Microsoft did for most of the documentation, they've changed the reference URL because after they renamed the service, after they added more capabilities to the service, they basically renamed the URLs. So I made sure to to update the entire presentation, and now it has all the most up-to-date information and all the updated URLs. Okay. Then comes the architecture best practices, something that we did yesterday. So I've just put the space here in these slides with the URL. Okay, this is how Sentinel works. So you already know how Sentinel is working. So this is at a very high level. If somebody asks you that how Sentinel works. So Sentinel collects data by using data connectors. It creates reports by using workbooks. It correlates alerts into incidents by using analytics tools. These are the building blocks. So how it is collecting, how it is getting data from connectors, how it is creating reports from workbook, how it is creating incidents from analytics rule, how it is doing the automation and orchestration by using playbooks, which is logic app. So that's how I have mentioned some of the key concepts of Sentinel, so that 6 months later from now, even if you don't get to work with Sentinel, you will at least remember some of the capabilities or some of the building blocks and components of Sentinel. All right. How do we enable Sentinel? This is how we enabled, and this is exactly what we did last week. So you basically need to sign into your subscription with a user that has contributor or owner access. Then you need to search for Sentinel. And after you search for Sentinel service, you need to choose a workspace to Microsoft Sentinel. So that's exactly what is mentioned here in these steps. And after you add Microsoft Sentinel, you will navigate, you will be seeing Microsoft Sentinel dashboard, which contains all the information. So this is how we enable Sentinel. Now we have done Sentinel enablement already. That part is already complete. So we will now move on to the next step, which is to detect. So we are done with the collect phase. We will get into the detect phase now. Any questions so far, guys? Okay. All right. Let's log into your respective subscription. I'm starting my virtual machines now. I always keep them in stock deallocated mode to save cost. Let's get started. My virtual machines are up and running. So what we need to do now that we have enabled, uh, I can navigate to Sentinel, and I have Sentinel started working and creating incidents, whatever it needs to do. It is doing all of it. So Sentinel is doing its job. However, before I start to use Sentinel, I also need to configure some settings in Sentinel. I'm say this is my security monitoring service, and this service may also have some issues, may also have issues related to health. So I want to make sure that I'm actually able to manage the health and auditing of this service, manage the health of this service, and audit how the service is behaving, whether it is meeting my expectation, whether it is experiencing an issue. So that is very important for you to do. So these are some of the initial steps that you will need to do. So after you enable the service, the very first thing that I need to do is to enable the health monitoring of the service. So how do I enable the health and audit monitoring of the service? Uh, at the bottom, under configuration on the overview tab, under configuration, you see an option that says settings. Now, this is where you will enable. In these settings, you will see pricing also. You will see the current pricing plan also. So you can see my current pricing plan right now is pay as you go. So this is my current pricing plan. It also shows me some information with respect to what is my data ingestion in last 30 days. So it also gives me data ingestion details that I was ingesting. You can see on 21st of July, I'm saying as and when I added more and more data sources, my per day ingestion continued to went up. It was almost 100 plus MBs. And then it came down because I stopped that service. So that's how data injection varies. And this is data retained per solution. So you have multiple solutions here. So this is how data is retained. So this is my pricing information. Then comes setting that I'm looking for. Now, Sentinel has some additional capabilities also like UEBA, user and entity behavior analytics, that I'll talk about. But right now, let's directly go to auditing and health monitoring. So in auditing and health monitoring, we need to enable it. So when we enable the auditing and health monitoring, so let's enable the service. So we have now enabled the auditing and health monitoring. Now what it will do, it says you can keep an eye on the availability and health of your system resources. Basically, with this service enabled, now I will be able to see how Sentinel is working, whether it is healthy, whether the service is healthy or not, and I can also audit this service. So what will happen when I enable this auditing and health monitoring? Sentinel will create two tables, and in those two tables, it will start to send health and auditing data. That's what Sentinel does. in those two tables, it will send the health and monitoring data. And those two tables you can see here under tables. So when you have enabled it, then you will need to navigate to the workspace, which is connected to the Sentinel, and there you will see it. But at the same time, you also need to enable the diagnostic settings. So we have enabled the monitoring. Now we will click on configure diagnostic settings. So it is the same diagnostic settings that we have enabled, and you can see the diagnostic settings is enabled. By default, it is enabled to the same workspace, which is connected to the Sentinel. However, if you feel that you want Sentinel, so Sentinel you're using to monitor your infrastructure for security. Now you also want Sentinel service to be monitored, and you don't want the same log analytics workspace to contain the data diagnostic. You would want to send it to a different workspace. If that is the requirement, you can also do that. So for that, you just need to click on add diagnostic setting. And here you can put the diagnostic setting name. You can select the logs, the one that you want to collect. I would like to collect all logs, the analytics log, automation, data collection, connectors, and say all the diagnostic settings related. And then I would like to send it to a different workspace that I may have. I do not have a separate workspace in this subscription. That's the reason it is only giving me one. But in a production environment, you will have multiple workspaces. So this is very important. This is one of the initial design phase that we are going through when we are enabling the service. Give me a moment here. Right. So please make sure, guys, that you enable the health and auditing of Sentinel, which is very important for you to, as a Sentinel admin, for you to make sure, make sure and uncheck for the health and audit data of Sentinel. Okay. Now, if we go to the workspace where we have enabled the, enable the health and auditing for the Sentinel, you will see inside tables, it has two tables created. So you can type Sentinel over here. So you can see there are two tables created, which is Sentinel Audit and Sentinel Health. Now, inside these tables, you will have all the health and audit data getting ingested, and you can run queries on these tables to get that data related to health and audit of Sentinel, which is very important. Something which is missing in most of the production deployments. When I audit a Sentinel deployment for a customer, I always find it missing. So I always ask the customer the same question, that this tool gives you visibility into your environment from the security perspective. But is there a service that is also monitoring this tool, whether this tool is working fine, whether this tool is healthy, whether this tool has issues or not? And that's where customer goes blank. This is the answer. And you should enable Sentinel health and auditing like this, so that you will have information about Sentinel. And whenever you want to run a query, you can directly go to the logs and you can run the query. You just need to type Sentinel Health there and you will be able to run the query. So I can directly go here and I can type Sentinel Audit and Sentinel Health. You can see here, those are the switches are available. So I can type Sentinel Health. And if I want to get some information, let's say I want to get top 20 alerts from Sentinel Health, I can take 20 and I can run this query. So right now you will not see the data. Why? Because we've just enabled it. It will take time. Whenever you enable a connector, whenever you enable any capability in Sentinel, you will need to give it some time. You cannot expect the data to be floating in the very next moment. It will take maybe a couple of minutes to an hour to basically provide you this information. You can also type Sentinel Health only and it will give you all the data, but it will not return any data because we've just enabled it. Okay, so probably we'll see it next day. So this is how we enable the health and auditing of the Sentinel. Is everyone with me on this? Okay, let's move on. So now that we have enabled, now we have done the initial configuration of the Sentinel from the deployment perspective. Let's start doing the job of Sentinel. So let's go back to the. All right. So we are done with deployment of, we are done with installation of solutions from Content Hub and enablement of data connectors. That's what we are done, which is my collect phase. So my collect phase is done. Now between collect and detect phase, in between, Sentinel by default will not provide you any information. It doesn't know what it needs to provide. You will need to configure Sentinel to detect threats. And how do we configure Sentinel to detect threats? From its threat detection capability. So Sentinel has a threat detection capability. And this threat detection capability is enabled by analytics rules. And these analytics rules are part of solutions, which is part of Content Hub. So we will need to create analytics rule. By default, if you look into your specific deployments, you will not see any alert. You will not see any rule configured. So we will need to start configuring the rules now. So how do I configure the rule? We configure the rule from the solution that we have enabled. So let's navigate to Sentinel. Now in a production environment, there are use cases. I'll also share the use cases with you, that what could be the typical use cases that you would like to enable. But let's understand from the Sentinel console. So it comes here. It says configuration. Now this is where the configuration is. But before you get into the configuration, you will need to identify all the data sources that you will need to ingest logs from. And that part we have already done. So if I just go to, and this is what we'll continue with, I'm saying we'll not go beyond because it's a lab environment. We don't have access to on-premises. So we have enabled all of this. I'm saying these are my data sources. In my account, I am getting logs from Amazon. I'm getting logs from Azure Active Directory. I'm getting Azure Activity logs. I'm getting Defender logs. I'm getting Azure Active Directory identity protection logs. I'm getting logs from Logic Apps also. I'm getting logs from NSGs. I'm getting logs from storage. If I had firewall, if I had other services, I would have configured the logs from those services also. So this is what I have configured. Now you can see there is an update. So whenever there is an update, you will also see an update here. If so, these are my solutions that I have installed. These are the solutions, and for this solution, Active Directory solution, there is an update. So I'll come to the update part later on. This is how you do the update. You just need to select the solution and click on action. When you click on action, you basically get an option to delete the solution or update the solution. So let's update the solution. Typically, we update the solutions not every day. It's a maintenance task which the administrator decides. So once in a month, the administrator is is basically supposed to optimize the solution by verifying the log volume, by looking at various logs and deciding whether they want to fine tune the logs, whether there is an update available for any solution. All of that is done once in a month. So it is updating the solution. So these are the solutions that I've installed. And as part of these solutions, if I go to any solution, let's say if I navigate to a solution, so this is installed successfully. Okay. So let's say if I navigate to the solution, which is Azure Active Directory that I've installed, if I click on manage, I will see all the components of this solution. Now, in this solution, I have 59 analytics rules, one data connector, 11 playbooks, and two workbooks. Now, what is this analytics rule? So this analytics rule is the capability, the threat detection capability of Sentinel. Now, by default, it will not have configured anything. When you enable Sentinel, it would only have one solution configured, which is the advanced multi-stage threat detection. I'll talk about it later. But by default, it will have nothing configured other than that. So you will need to manually configure. See, Sentinel cannot take its decision because it doesn't know which environment it is installed in, which customer, which industry vertical it is installed in, and what is their logging requirements, what is their intelligence, threat intelligence, or investigation or detection requirements. So Sentinel only provides you the capabilities. You need to enable it manually, and that is where between detect, between collect and detect, I will have this phase, which is enabling analytics rule, creating analytics rule. If you want to see the definition or the details of analytics rule, I will share the content. I'll share the documentation for it. Just understand that this is the capability. Okay. Now you can see here in this solution, we have one data connector. The data connector is already enabled. If you click on the data connector, it also says in use. So you already know that it is enabled. If you select the data connector, to your right, it will populate the data connector information, and you can see the data connector status is connected, right? Status is connected, and you will also see that it is pumping a lot of data into the workspace, into the Sentinel. So a lot of data is coming. You can see sign-in logs are coming, 14 sign-in logs, 64 Azure AD managed identity sign-in logs, 233 non-interactive user sign-in logs, audit logs are 8. All of this information is flowing in. Some information is not flowing in. It shows faded because we have not that service enabled, like ADFS, AD user risk events. We have not enabled conditional access. So any capability of Azure AD that is not enabled, the data type for that capability will not be shown as green here. So my service is working fine. The status is connected. Now I have all of these analytics rule. This is my use case, that what I want to monitor. From Azure directory, what exactly I want to monitor. So I'm actually monitoring sign-in logs and audit logs. But what is my use case? What kind of activities I want to generate an alert for? Whenever that activity happens, I want an alert to be generated. So let's decide on what I want to monitor. So this is so for Azure Active Directory, what I want to monitor. What is my use case? So my first use case, I could say that I want an alert or incident to be generated by Sentinel when when a disabled identity attempts to sign in. So somebody, you disabled an account for an identity, most probably the person is on leave, probably the person is leaving the organization, probably the person does not need access to Azure Active Directory. The account is disabled and the person is trying to sign in. The identity, there has been an attempt to sign in using that identity or a disabled identity. So that's one of my use case. I'm talking about the use cases that I have typically recommended to configure in production environment, or I have seen in various production environments where these use cases are configured, or what Microsoft suggests at a bare minimum to configure. You don't want to configure all of the use cases. I mean, say if this solution has 59 analytics rule, I don't want you to configure all of them. It will unnecessarily create enormous log volume. Why would you like to do that? Just it's a monitoring solution. Identify your security monitoring requirements as a customer and enable only what is needed. Otherwise, you will have unnecessarily log volume coming, unnecessarily incidents coming. Okay. So this is the one use case that I want to ignore. When a disabled, I want to get alerts for or incidents created. When a disabled identity attempts to sign in. Second, when there is a brute force attack on the portal. Now, what is this brute force attack? So brute force attack may have multiple definitions. I'm seeing my requirements. So brute force attack basically means that on an unauthorized attempt to sign into the portal. That is brute force attack, unauthorized attempts. Somebody who is not authorized is trying to attempt to sign into the portal by using a combination of credentials. That's brute force attack. But who will decide when it is a brute force attack? I'm saying what will be the permissible attempt numbers. So that's another thing that you need to think of. Brute force attack on Azure portal is another another rule that I want to enable, another detection capability that I want to enable for Sentinel. Now, similarly, you will have multiple. So for example, if I go back, so I give you this liberty to configure anything because that is why we have given you a separate lab. Each participant has their own lab. So you can see all of these. Now let's quickly go through them. So you have GitHub sign-in burst from multiple locations. When multiple locations GitHub, sign-in activities are done. So if you're using GitHub, for example, cross-tenant access setting organizations inbound collaboration, attempts to sign in to disable accounts. This is something that I have enabled. Suspicious application content for online access, cross-tenant access setting organization detected. Azure Active Directory PowerShell accessing non-Azure AD resources. Account created or deleted by non-approved user. Somebody who is not approved to create or delete an account is actually doing it. Modified domain federation trust settings. Bulk change to privileged account permissions. So we have a lot of capabilities here. You can see user added to Azure Active Directory privileged group. That Azure Active Directory has a privileged group. Privileged group means reader, contributor, user access administrator, and owner. So there's a privileged group and some user is added. You want an alert to be created. Brute force attack against a cloud PC. Anonymous sign-in location by user account and authenticating application. Attempt to bypass conditional access rule in Azure AD. So if you have enabled conditional access, so there are 59 analytics rule. You will be able to configure these rules when you have all the capabilities of Azure Active Directory configured. If you don't have those capabilities configured, the rule will not do anything. I'm saying you will just enable the rule and it will absolutely do nothing. So then similarly, new access credentials, successful logon from IP and failure from a different IP. So there is another rule that from one IP, the person is able to log in, but from another IP, it is failing. Brute force attack against GitHub action. Privileged account sign-in failure spikes. Password spray attacks. Cross-tenant attack. User sign-in failure due to CA spike. Suspicious Azure AD joint devices update. Explicit MFA deny. MFA rejected by user. User is rejecting MFA. So all of these brute force attack against Azure portal. A brute force attack is happening in Azure portal. Suspicious application consent, suspicious similar. So these are all the analytics rule that we have available. Now let's just configure at least some of them. Okay, so let's configure the one which is, these are the two that I would like you to configure. I'm saying at a bare minimum, you can configure more. When a disabled identity attempts to sign in, and brute force attack on Azure portal, so that we can configure it. We can manipulate the configuration in Azure AD. We can simulate the alert creation, incident creation, because we will be able to do it. And then we can see how we investigate into Sentinel. That's what we need to do as a whole in Sentinel. So I'm saying, if you look at the life cycle, you've enabled the service. Now you're configuring the rules in the service, so that service will start to generate alert and incident. Then you will investigate into those alerts and incidents, manage them, and in the end you will configure automation. That's it. And then the service management, which we have already configured. So let's create these alerts. When a disabled identity attempts to sign in, brute force attack on Azure portal. These two. So I would like one of the volunteer, because I have it configured in my account. So I need one of the volunteer to share the screen so that I can help you configure it. Quentin is sharing it. Thank you, Quentin. Great. Let's move on. I'll keep it on the other side. Okay, let's select the analytics rule, which is attempts from disabled account. Attempts to sign in from disabled accounts. You will probably find it on the top. Yep, this one. Great. All right, you need to select one of them. Okay. Now, when you click on is the screen visible to everyone? First of all, is Quinton's screen visible to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. So on this screen, you will see all the analytics rule that has been configured. So you can see active rule. There is one active rule right now which is configured. You will always get that prompt which says analytics rule will content sources gallery. You can always X out of it, because Microsoft is transforming from gallery based solution to content hub based solution. So it is just informing user all the time that if you don't find something, just go to content hub and find it. Okay, so this is the rule that I'm going to enable. So we will select the rule, the one that you want to enable. Select the rule, and then to your right you will see the option. Okay, so after you have selected the rule, let's read the rule description, that what this rule will do. Quinton, the font is very small. I'm not able to read it. Not sure about others if they can read it. That is okay. Great, now it is okay. All right, so let's understand the rule description. The rule description is that whenever an identity, a disabled identity, tries to sign into Azure portal, the rule will create an alert. That's what this rule is all about. And this is very important for you to know, that if there is somebody who is trying to sign into my portal, somebody who has an identity but it is disabled. That's the first thing. Second, if somebody is trying to sign into my Azure portal with some combination of credentials, that's the another thing. So first, let's focus on this one. So it says it will identify failed attempts to sign into disable accounts across multiple Azure applications, and default threshold for Azure applications attempted to sign is to 3. That's the default threshold. And that's the message which is, so what happens in Azure Active Directory, for every activity, there is a code. And when you create an analytics rule, when you write a custom query, when you write a custom analytics rule, you will need to know that code, that specific code, because you will always reference to that code. So the code is 50057, and this code is for those user accounts who are disabled by an administrator. And you already know that only a user access administrator. security admin, and global admin has the capability to enable or disable a user in Azure AD. So that's the code. Okay. Then it also tells you whether you have used this rule or not. So it says under node, you haven't used this template yet, you can use it. And second, it says one or more data sources used by this rule is missing. Why it says it is missing? Because you have not enabled all the capabilities of Azure AD. So you can ignore it. Click on create a rule. Now, when we click on create a rule, whether you are creating a custom rule or whether you are creating a pre-configured rule, the process will remain the same. So let's understand what happens in this process. Since this is a pre-configured rule, all you can do just click on next, next, and enable it. But we would like to see that what all options are available in this. So on the general tab, you will see the rule name. You can change the rule name if you wish based on your specific company's requirement, or if you're following some nomenclature for Sentinel, you can use that nomenclature in the rule name. The description, you can also change the description if you wish. Then comes the severity. Severity, you can decide whether when this activity happens and when an alert is generated from as part of this activity, will that alert be a medium or high? For me, as a security admin, it's a high alert. It's a, it is high. So let's change the severity to high instead of medium. Azure thinks that it is medium, but for me, because that's where you need to take a decision as an administrator, as an admin user, that what is the severity of this incident? Somebody who is disabled, some identity which is disabled is trying to sign in. There is a high probability that this identity was disabled by the administrator as part of some disciplinary action. And now the person is trying to sign in. You don't know what that person is intending to do. So it's a high severity. Then comes tactics and techniques. It is click on this tactics and techniques. Now this is the type. So basically when Microsoft Azure wants to normalizes the normalizes the capability or normalizes the Sentinel with the other solutions, these are the different types of tactics and techniques. So these are the terminologies or technical jargons which we use in security domain, that this is related to initial access, this is related to defense evasion, because somebody's evasion the defense privilege escalation. So these are the tactics and techniques that you can also select. Okay, this is already selected. Let's click on next. Now the status for this rule, you say it is enabled because we are going to enable it. But what you can do, you can create an analytics rule and you can keep it disabled. Don't enable it. This is like you are in the initial, you are into the project implementation phase. You are building and deploying the Sentinel capabilities. You're enabling the rules, but Sentinel is not in production yet. So what you will do, you will create rules and you will keep them disabled. But we'll keep it enabled because we are into production now. Next, set rule logic. Okay, now this is where the query is. So this is the query that will fetch logs from the log analytics workspace and will give those logs to Sentinel analytics rule, who will then create an alert. So we will need to check whether what is the result of this query for now. So we click on query result, view query result at the bottom. Yeah. Okay. So it says there is no result from this query. Why? Because you have not done this activity in the past. So we will first enable the analytics rule and then we will simulate it. We will create, this is like injecting, this is like a VAPT, vulnerability analysis and penetration testing, that we will intentionally inject the, anomaly. So right now it says the rule threshold is 3, which means when a disabled identity tries to sign into Azure portal thrice, that is the threshold. Let's keep it 1. In the production, we always keep it 1. I don't want my disabled identities to sign in. I need to know. All right. And here you can see the result type. So in most of the rules that is related to Azure AD or related to access and authorization, you will always see the result type, which is nothing but a code, event ID. So whenever somebody with a disabled ID tries to sign in an Azure AD, a log is created in Azure AD with the event ID 50057. So that is what the log is, and that is what the description of the log is. Nothing else you need to change here. Just click on, just close this log page and come back to the query, and in the query make the changes. Not here. In the query, let's keep the threshold as 1. Great. All right. Then comes the next, which is alert enhancement. Now, when this alert is generated, you would want to see some basic details. You want to see what is the name of the identity, what is the UIN of the identity, from what location did the identity try to sign in, what is the IP address of that location. You would want to see those information, and that is where entity mapping comes into the picture. And this is very important for creating an analytics rule. How efficient you are as an admin or as an operational person will be decided by this entity mapping, because this entity mapping is the food for thought for your incident responders or incident investigation team. When they receive an incident, they would want to get all of this information, that who is the who is the user, what is the IP address, what is the location, and any specific property. And that's exactly what you are configuring here. And this alert enhancement or entity mapping is coming from the analytics rule. I'm sorry, coming from the query that you have written. In the query, you will need to define all of these entities. So you can see in the account is the entity, and in which it's like a key value pair. So it has a key as name. So it will show you, the name of the person. It will show you the UPN suffix of the person also, that you can see in the query itself. It is there. And then it will also show you the IP address of the person. That is most important for me to find out, right? You can see user principal name, UPN suffix, and you can see the other information also in the query itself. So this entity mapping is very important. Otherwise, your operations team will find it difficult to get the relevant information, and they may end up looking into Azure Active Directory logs to get to the details of it. But if you make the entity mapping correct, then they might not go to a secondary location to validate the information. That's the beauty of entity mapping. Okay, let's click on next. Scroll it down. I want to see. Okay, custom details. No. Yeah, custom details. Over here, you will, I'm saying, if you want to put any custom details, you can put it here. Then comes alert details. Next. The next tab, which is alert detail. This is where you will type the alert details information if you want to put any. Let's go with the default. Then the most important part is query scheduling. So the most important part is query scheduling, that you are creating this analytics rule which has a query that will run, and it will fetch the results. The results will be produced to analytics rule, and it will take a decision based on the result. What decision it will take will come in the subsequent steps. But what is the schedule? When do I want to run this query? So I want to right now the configuration is that I want to run this query once in a day, and I want to look out data for the last 1 day. So this query will run, let's say, at 10 o'clock in the morning every day, and it will see the data last 24 hours. And if it finds any activity wherein an identity which is disabled tried to sign in, it will take the next steps. So to make sure that we get some output from this rule, let's change this information. Let's customize it. Let's make it 1 hour. The query will run every hour, and it will look for the data of last 1 hour only. Okay, great. Then it says start running. When it starts running automatically, yes, I want this query to start running at this moment, or I can also provide a specific time that this query should start running from this time frame. So I can say automatically. Then say alert threshold. Now, what is my alert threshold is, so when this query runs, and if it finds even a single identity which tried to sign in, which was disabled, it will create an event. It will create an alert. So this is my alert threshold. It says that whenever the finding is more than 0, which means that even if you find one incident, one activity then please create an alert. That's what alert threshold is. So when you create an analytics rule, you would want to put the alert threshold with some value that, okay, if it happens once, ignore it. But if it happens 3 times, 5 times, then create an alert. But for this type of rule, I want to keep it 0 so that whenever there is any alert that gets generated related to this activity, I want to be notified. Okay. Then next is event grouping. Event grouping basically means that when this event happens, and if it continues to happen, let's say in the last 1 hour, an identity tried to log in to Azure portal 50 times. Will it create 50 alerts, or will it combine all of those alerts into a group and only create one alert and one incident against it? That is what grouping is. So we will always group all related event into a group. So that is by default selected, group all events into a single alert. Related to the same identity, if there are 50 attempts, they will all get into the same alert. Okay. Then comes suppression. Suppression basically means that once a rule provides an outcome, once a rule provides its analysis, do you want that rule to stop working unless you look into that analysis and decide what needs to be done? Or you want that rule to continue work and keep providing its analysis? So by default, we will always keep it off, but there will be some use cases wherein for some rules, you will turn it on. So say stop running query after alert is generated. No, I want this query to run every hour for the last 1 hour of data and identify if there is any disabled account tried to sign in and create an alert. So next is incident setting. So we are good with it. Okay. Now in the incident setting, so what Sentinel is doing, similar to Azure Monitor, this is also a monitoring service, but it's a security monitoring service. So in Azure Monitor, you create an alert rule and it will create an alert. Similarly, Sentinel will also create an alert, but Sentinel also has the capability to create an incident from that alert so that the incident is forwarded to our security team. So on this incident setting tab, it is asking whether I should create an incident from the alert. So it will be enabled. Yes, create an incident with this alert, which is already enabled. Then it says alert grouping. Group related alerts triggered by this analytics rule into incidents. No. If I enable the alert grouping, what will happen? Let's say there is one user, Krishan Kumar, who tries to sign in and his ID is disabled. One alert will be created and one incident will be created. Now Kishan tries to do that activity 20 times. It will be the same alert because all of those events will go into the same alert. Then there is another user who is Ram, who also tries to sign in. Now Ram's account is also disabled. So another alert will be created. And for these two alerts, there will be two separate incidents that will be created. But if I click on alert grouping, then there will be one incident. Now that is not the right practice. I want my incident responders or my L1 team to look into each identity and identify what needs to be done. So we will not enable alert grouping here. Okay, so it says when you enable it, the very first column which is enabled here is it says at the bottom, grouping alerts into a single incident if all the entities match, which means entities are matching, it will create a single incident, which is not done. Okay, next is automated response. Now this is where I can decide that now so far I have given the intelligence to Sentinel that Sentinel do one thing. Whenever an disabled identity tries to sign in, please create an alert and convert that alert into incident. That's the intelligence that I've given to Sentinel so far. Now I need to tell Sentinel what happens after it. After you create an incident, are you supposed to do anything? Are you supposed to send that incident to ServiceNow, to a third-party solutions like Jira, ServiceNow, BMC Remedy? Are you supposed to assign that incident to somebody, an incident owner or incident user? Are you supposed to take some corrective action? For example, enable the user. User is trying to sign in. Maybe the user needs to do something. So please enable the user, which is wrong. I'm joking. But this is the kind of input that I can give to the user, give into the automated response. So let's see what all automated response capabilities are available. Click on add new. Okay, click on actions. Leave everything. Click on actions, the third option. Yeah, actions. Okay, see, these are the capabilities that I have. I can run a playbook. Playbook I'll come back to probably probably Monday. Then we'll get into the playbook part, the automation part. Change status. So whenever an incident is generated, I want to change the status of the incident. Change severity. I can change the severity of the instance. Assign owner. I can also assign one of my Sentinel operations group team member as an owner of this incident. I can add text to this incident, and I can add task also. Add task is the new capability that they have added. Task means I can create an additional task and assign it to somebody related to this incident. So these are my options. We'll get into these options probably, when we get into the respond part, which is the automatic response. So these are my automation rules. Right now, I'm not going to enable any of that. So click on cancel. Great. Now click on review and create. Great. Now this is validating the configuration that you have given. Since you have modified some of the configurations, it is doing the validation whether they are aligned, and now you can save this too. So when we are saving this rule will be enabled automatically the very next moment, and it will start to query your Azure Active Directory sign-in logs for the disabled user accounts who tries to sign in once in an hour. Now, when you enable a rule, it runs at that very moment. So it will run the rule right now also. However, it will not find any data. For every rule that it is running, there will be a log that will get created, and that is where I have enabled the health and auditing of Azure Sentinel, Microsoft Sentinel also, so that if something does not work as expected, if I get into the troubleshooting of Sentinel, then I will get some intelligence from those logs. So now you can see there are two analytics rules which are configured here. One is the default rule, which is advanced multi-stage threat detection, and the other is that the one that I have created. Okay. Now, now looking at this rule, you can see, let's look at the columns. So severity is high, name you already have put in, rule type is scheduled because you've scheduled this rule, status is enabled, tactics, this is related to initial access. That was the code of the tactics so that you can map it with other cybersecurity intelligence threat feed. And source name is Azure Active Directory because this comes from Azure Active Directory solution. So if you create any rule yourself, it will say custom source. Custom source means that it's a custom analytics rule. So we'll also create custom analytics rule. So this is how my rule is created. Now what you need to do to give some feed to this rule, we need to simulate. Ours is not a production environment. So what you need to do, go back to Azure Active Directory, the Azure Active Directory service. And in the Azure Active Directory service, I'm sure you must have at least one or two users. Let's disable one of the user. Yeah, disable one of the user. I would say disable two users. So select the user, click on the username, and now disable the user. Under my feed, you say enabled, click on edit and disable this user. I'm saying you would have disabled it from edit itself. Okay, you can disable. Did you disable it? This account enabled, you just need to uncheck that box. There's a box that says account enabled. Yeah, uncheck this box. Okay, great. Save it. The user is now disabled. You can see the account status as disabled. Go ahead and disable one more user. All right, great. Both the users are disabled. Now open an incognito tab. I hope you remember the passwords for these users. If not, then let's get the let's get the passwords for the user, both the users. Quentin, you made a note of the password.
I've got the passwords, yes.
Okay, great. All right, let's go to incognito tab. Open an incognito tab in private browsing. Okay, and let's try and sign in using these user accounts. Okay, great. All right. Now you need to understand one thing here, all the participants. If Quentin is typing the right password for the user, the message that Quentin will get is your account has been logged out. Contact your support person to unlock it. But if Quentin types the incorrect password, then it will say incorrect password only. Type the incorrect password, Quentin. Type any password and then sign in. Now sign in. See, it says your account or password is incorrect. Now this is where authentication and authorization comes into the picture. So when this user ID goes to Azure AD, when this UPN or when this user goes to Azure AD for authorization, if the password is incorrect, it will directly say password is incorrect. But if the password is correct, then the authorization comes into the picture. Authentication is done. Now the authorization. At the authorization phase, Azure AD will notice that the user is disabled. So Azure AD will prompt the other message, which is your account has been logged out. So understand the difference between brute force and the intended login here. The analytics tool that we have created is when a disabled user attempts to sign in, which means when a disabled user tries to sign in with the right credential. That's what my analytics rule is. And the brute force will qualify when this user continues to try to sign in with incorrect password. Because in a brute force attack, the password will always be incorrect because they are using a combination of passwords. I'm saying they have a bot which is trying to connect to an Azure customers portal by using a combination of passwords. And if they are successful, well and good. If they are not, then it's a brute. In both cases, it's a brute force attack. But sometimes they are successful, sometimes they are not. So we have done this activity and do one thing, Quinton. Try to at least type the password, the correct password twice or thrice, so that you will have multiple login attempts, at least 3-4 multiple login attempts for this user. Type the right password again and again. Great. One more time. Okay. Now do the same activity for the other user. Great. All right. So now we have two users whose account was disabled and they tried to sign in. It will not come so quickly. Go back to Azure Active Directory first. This is how we do the investigation. or this is how we go back to Azure Active Directory once again. Go to sign-in logs in Azure Active Directory. First, the logs will come into the sign-in logs, and from sign-in logs, they will be streamed into log analytics workspace, and from there, they will get into the Sentinel. So this is the flow. Do you see this information in sign-in logs, first of all? Last 24 hours, you only see 2 logs for the user Capybara, which means there was another user for which you're not getting the logs. So it will take at least 2 to 3 minutes for the logs to appear here, then another 2 to 3 minutes for the logs to get into the log analytics workspace, and then another 2 to 3 minutes for the logs to get into the Sentinel analytics engine, and then the analytics engine will basically look into those logs and will create an incident. So that is the flow. So which means if you enable something, it will not happen the next moment. The second thing that you need to remember is the query, the schedule time. My query runs once in an hour, once in every hour, and then it produces the alert, and that alert is converted into incident, which means that my query will run. So imagine that I configured that rule at 9:50, when say 9:50 India time, the query will run around 10:50. And then that query will bring in the results. So first the result will come here. Here the result has not come yet. It is only coming for the one user. It will take 2 to 3 minutes, as I said, for the results to arrive here. So did we get the log? I would request
Yes,
you to share
you can
your
see it on the
screen once
screen.
again.
I'm still sharing.
Okay, yep, I can see your screen. Give me a moment here. All right, so we have got the logs for both the users, right? Great. Now let's go to the analytics rule once again. Navigate to the Sentinel portal, go to analytics rule. So whatever analytics rule that we configure, this is for all the participants. Once you are done with configuring we call it analytics rule or threat detection rules. Whatever terminology you're comfortable with, it is threat detection rules or analytics rules. Now, whenever you click on analytics option under configuration, it will show you all the analytics rules which are configured, and it also shows you the status whether they are enabled or not. So we'll go to the first analytics rule, the one that we have just configured, and we will modify it. So let's click on the analytics rule. Okay, you see those two arrows pointing towards the left. Yep, you need to click there. Okay, click on edit now. Okay, go to the next tab, which is set rule logic. And here, let's run this query once again. So you can click on test with current data or view query results, because we need to make sure whether the log analytics workspace has received these logs from Active Directory or not. So we'll run the query results. Great. So we have got the results. I'm saying we've got this information about both the users who tried to sign in, and you can see their IP address and all the information. Great. Now what we need to do, just go to incident settings. Next tab. It's out of it. So this is how you can validate whether the logs have been received by the workspace or not. Yeah, discard it. And go to incident settings. Okay, next. No, go to the second tab where you have the schedule option. I just want to change the schedule so that the query will run immediately. The previous one. Yeah, over here. Oh, okay. Now instead of 1 hour, let's do it 2 hours in both the boxes. So what we are doing, we are modifying the query so that as soon as we save this modification, the query will run instantly and you will see that alert getting converted into incident in Sentinel portal. Okay. Now just Go ahead and save it. Great. So you have saved the rule. Now go back to incidents. Click on incidents. And you should see an incident here soon. You refresh it. Great. See, there's an incident now. And it is the same incident which has just got generated because of the threat detection rule that you have configured. And threat detection rule was able to identify an event related to the query which is there in the threat detection rule. So the alert is generated. And that alert got converted into the incident because that's what we configured in the threat detection rule. So this is now till this point, it was the admin activity. This is what admin is supposed to be doing. Admin is supposed to be configuring use cases in the form of analytics rule and then enable them based on the requirement and leave it for the operations team to look into incidents that gets generated and work on those incidents. So we are done with the admin part here. The operations team part we will do later on. So we'll not get into the details of this incident. We'll just keep it here. Now let's go back and enable some additional rules. So go back to the same solution, Azure Active Directory solution. I would like us to enable more rules so that we'll see the capability of Sentinel. And we will enable at least one rule from all the solutions that we have installed. Okay, manage. Okay, now the next threat detection rule that we are configuring is for the brute force attack. Now, when those two users, when they were trying to sign in, if the users are typing incorrect password, it basically means that the user account is compromised. And if they continuously try to put the incorrect user password, and then in the end they are able to successful because they are using a multiple combination of password, and then they are successful, it constitutes a brute force attack. So now we will configure the brute force attack threat detection rule also for the Active Directory. So search for brute force. On the top, there is a search bar. You can just type in the search brute and you will see all the options related to. Yeah, type brute. Great. Now you can see brute force attack. There are three options: brute force attack on a PC, on a GitHub account, and on the portal. I'm more interested into brute force attack on my portal. I do not want people to try to gain access to my Azure portal. So hit configuration. So I'm configuring this threat detection rule now. Okay. Select the rule and click on configure. Create rule.
Create.
Yeah. Okay. Can we go back? I just want to read the description for the participants.
Okay.
Okay, you can see it here also. Stop here. Okay.
No, sorry.
So this brute force attack, that's okay. A brute force attack on Azure portal. Now you will see some logic in this rule. So the logic is that whenever there's an evidence of brute force activity against Azure portal by highlighting multiple authentication failure and by a successful authentication. So what it tries to say that somebody will try to gain access to my Azure portal by using a combination of passwords, and then in the end, the person will be able to log into the portal. That constitutes a brute force attack according to this rule. However, there are multiple definitions of it, and that is why we will also configure a custom rule to identify brute force attack, because this rule has its own limitations. So, and it says that the default failure count is 10 and the default time window is 20 minutes. So what it tries to say that within 20 minutes of a window, if somebody tries to log in to my Azure portal with an incorrect password, and if it is 10 times incorrect, and then on the 11th incident, it is correct, it is a brute force attack. But for me, security is primitive, security is very important. Even if the person is able to sign in after 5 attempts, I will still consider a brute force attack. And I would also want to include some additional aspects to it. Because in a typical brute force attack, which happens these days, they are triggered by bots. So what an attacker does, attacker will deploy bots on multiple systems across the network. So there will be bots running on my system, running on your system across multiple locations, multiple geographies. Then the attacker will give instructions to the bot to attempt sign in to a specific service, let's say Azure portal, which belongs to me as a customer. Now, what will happen? All the bots at different locations will try and sign in. And when they try and sign in, definitely they are not going to be successful, or they may be successful. But for each attempt that they make, I will be able to capture some basic information in terms of what location they are trying to sign in from, what IP address they are using, what user principal name they are using to sign in. And that will also constitute a brute force attack, because for a brute force attack, it is also, I'm saying these days, brute force attack happens like this. It is triggered by bots which are deployed in the network across multiple locations. So it is not the same location that the person is trying to log in. It could be multiple locations also. So I will have to, I will have to modify this query and make it more collective, make it more comprehensive to capture every minute aspect of a brute force attack. And that is why I have a separate query for it that we will configure as a custom rule. This is the default rule out of the box threat detection rule that we are configuring. Okay, let's create rule now. Okay, you can keep the severity as high for this rule also. Great. Let's click on set rule logic. Since these are out of the box threat detection rules, we can directly, save these rules by not making any changes and go with the default settings. But we are not doing it because we want to understand the options which are available and the probabilities as an admin or as an operations team that you have available to you. Now, this is the query rule. It says let time range is 24 hours, which is okay. If failure count is 10. So I would like to change this failure count, probably, let's say 5. Quentin, how many times did you log in from those user accounts by typing the incorrect password? 5 times
I
approximately?
think
Or 3
at
times?
least 4.
Maybe
Incorrect
let's keep
password.
it 3 then.
The incorrect, I think we only
Yeah,
did a
incorrect.
couple of times. So we may
Okay,
have to do some more.
That's okay. Instead of 10, let's keep the threshold as 2. So I'm just showing you how to be modified in a production environment. You will identify a specific parameter and then you will configure the rule. This is where we are trying to simulate. So that is why we are keeping it 2. Okay, so my threshold is 2. The authentication window is 20 minutes. Instead of 20 minutes, I can make it 10 minutes. Okay. Now what it says that if within an interval of 10 minutes, there is an attempt to sign into my portal with an incorrect password, more than twice, that's my threshold, 2 or more than 2, then I will consider it as a brute force attack. Okay, great. Go to entity mapping. And this is the information that I'm capturing in the entity mapping. So I'm capturing the name of the display name of the person. I'm saying that that person will use some name. I'm capturing the UPN suffix, the UPN suffix, and I'm capturing the IP address. So for an attack, I need this information, IP address. If I want the location information, if I want more information, I will just need to modify my query. For that, I have a custom query that I will show. Let's go with the default values here and go to the schedule. So it will run. Schedule is it will run every day. So instead of every day, let's make it 1 day, 1 hour, and last 1 hour of data. Great. Go up and see whether we are getting the results of this query. Because if we don't get a result, the alert will not come. Go up and check whether the query is generating a result. Not right now. It is not generating the result, which means it will take more time to generate the results. Or probably you will need to do this once again. So time range is 24 hours, failure count is 2, authentication window is 10. Okay, the another thing that I forgot. The another thing that in this query, there has to be a successful attempt as well. After failure attempt, there has to be one successful attempt also. So since there is no successful attempt, this query will not generate any result for you. So what you need to do, Quinton, after this query, after we configure this query, configure this rule, you'll need to go back to the Azure portal, use one user account, which is enabled, not disabled, because for disabled, you will not be able to get a successful signing. So an account which is enabled, use that account to log in by typing incorrect password at least twice, thrice, 5 times, and then use the right password to log in. And it has to happen within 10 minutes of window. And then you will see an alert rule getting generated. So we cannot use this account. We will need to use any other account. Is ferret account enabled?
Yeah, disabled.
No, we need to use a enabled account.
Enabled account. Okay, I can change that.
Disabled account will not be able to sign in at all, whether it types the right password or wrong password. So we'll need to identify the account which is enabled. Okay. Type the incorrect password. Great. Type the incorrect password again. At least 5, 6 times type the incorrect password and then type the correct password. Done. Now type the correct password. Ask later. Don't show me this message again. Okay. Sign in. Great. All right. So Jess is successfully able to sign in after trying to attempt to sign in using an incorrect password a number of times, 3, 4 times. We have a threat detection rule configured in Sentinel that will read all the sign-in logs and see if there is any sign-in log from any identity which was initially failed sign-in for a couple of attempts and then successful sign-in within a period of 10 minutes, within a window of 10 minutes. And if that happens, Microsoft Sentinel is instructed to consider that as an incident to create an alert and convert that alert into an incident. This is the intelligence that we have given to the Sentinel. So this will happen, but not right now, Quentin. You need to give it at least 10 minutes. So we'll come back to this 10 minutes later, but let's create this rule quickly. Yeah, let's keep that value. That's okay. Leave everything as it is, and let's just create this rule. Great. So this rule is also created. So we've got 2 rules now. We'll go back to the now. This is where, guys, I just wanted to introduce that how do we create a threat detection out of the box threat detection rule, which is my next step after enabling the Sentinel, after configuring the data connectors. Now I will leave this option to you that how many threat detection rules you want to create from Azure Active Directory. However, for any rule to work, any rule to create alerts and incident, the query which is there in the rule must show the output, must have the data. If the query does not show the output, the rule will never create the incident. So I'm also telling you how to troubleshoot a rule. If you have created a rule which is not generating alerts and incident, and you feel that you have done everything right, this is how you troubleshoot. You will always copy the query and run that query either in the rule added window or go to the workspace which is connected to the Sentinel and run the query there and see whether the data is coming. If the data is not coming, then the rule will not create alerts and incidents. So it is not the rule which is at fault, it is your query which is not producing data. And rule depends on query to generate alerts and incidents. So understand the building blocks or how it functions in the backend. Okay, great. So we have created two rules from Azure Active Directory. We'll go to another data connector or another solution that we have installed, and we will also identify some rules from there and enable it. So Quentin, request you to go to the data connector page. I want to see how many data connectors you've enabled. Okay, great. So I've got Azure Active Directory, identity protection not needed. Let's go to Azure storage account. So let's go to the solution of storage account and let's see how many rules are available, out of the box rules are available. Then I will also have some custom rules for storage account. You can click on status, the status filter, and filter the status as installed. That is the easiest way. Yeah, keep installed checked, rest of them unchecked. Okay, all right. So we see the storage account, great. Let's see how many, scroll it down. Okay, so in this connect, we don't have any analytics rule here, which means we will need to create custom rules. And I've got custom rules also. But today we are not focusing on custom, we are focusing on building the capability. So let's move on to the next connector. Storage account doesn't have anything. Let's go to the another solution, another installed solution. Okay, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. I'm sure it may have a couple of analytics rules. Okay, there is one which says detect core backup deletion activity from related security alert. So let's click on this rule. Okay, and let me see. It says the query identifies any effort by an attacker to delete backup container while also searching for any security alerts that may be linked to the same activity in order to uncover additional information. Okay, so the query is that when somebody tries to delete a backup container basically means recovery services vault or the backup center. If it happens, then so let's create this rule. Okay, let's go to rule logic. Okay, can you copy the query into a notepad? I want to see this query. Okay. Okay, does it have vault name, which is good? Great, I got it. Close this query now. Close this notepad. So what this rule will do, I will say in a production environment, we have backup configured for our virtual machines, SQL databases, Azure SQL PaaS instances, app services, skill sets. So most of the compute services, they support backup. and backup is configured for it. So when this query runs, what it will do, it will, it will give you, I'm saying it will look for any event when somebody deleted a backup container, which is a recovery services vault. And if the backup container was deleted, then it will bring up all of this information. Show me the entities. Entity mapping. Okay. So see, first from the account, it will bring up the username who did it, the domain, this domain suffix of the username, the resource ID for which the backup was deleted, the Azure resource ID, host name. I'm a host name basically means the if it is a virtual machine for which the backup is deleted, so the host name of the virtual machine. DNS domain is basically if the virtual machine is joined to a domain, then the FQDN of that virtual machine and the IP address from where this activity was performed. So these are some of the entities that it will provide. Now let's click on, let's directly save this. There is nothing that we want to, no changes we want to do here. Okay. So we are done. This is also saved. Let's go back to other solutions and see if there are analytics rules that we want to configure. Okay, Active Directory, we are done. Okay, Azure activities. This must have some analytics rule. Great, there are 12 analytics rule here. So let's configure some of the rules from here also. Okay, let's see the analytics rule. It says creation of expensive compute in Azure. Now, creation of expensive compute in Azure is both an incident as well as cost optimization, against the cost optimization, against the FinOps operation. So you already know that virtual machines in Azure has a cost, depending on the architecture, depending on the CPU and memory configuration. So what this analytics rule will do, this analytics rule will identify if there's a creation of large size or expensive virtual machines with GPU or with a large number of virtual CPUs in Azure. That's what this rule will analyze. However, uh, you can also configure the same using Azure policy. I'm saying I can configure an Azure policy service. I can create a rule in Azure policy that will not allow users to provision virtual machines with higher SKUs. That's one way of restricting it, which is known as proactive restriction, because this is reactive. When something happens, then the log is generated. Sentinel will pick up the log, create an incident. And what if Sentinel is configured to run this query once in a day? And let's say at 10 o'clock in the morning, Sentinel ran the query. Sentinel did not find anything. At 10:30, 30 minutes later, some user created a high-end virtual machine, and the cost of the virtual machine is $100 an hour. Now, next morning at 10 o'clock, Sentinel will run the query once again. And Sentinel will capture it from the log that somebody a day before at 10:30 provisioned a expensive virtual machine. Sentinel will create an incident. Incident goes to the owner. Owner investigates the incident and deletes the virtual machine. After investigation, they decide to delete the virtual machine. But within this, you have already been charged by Microsoft for 24 hours or maybe more than that, depending on how much time you take to decide to delete the virtual machine. So there is a billing that has already happened that you need to pay for 24 hours. Now this is where the drawback is. So we should not use monitoring services for cost optimization of efforts, because monitoring services will not produce data in near real time. And that is why this comes under FinOps or governance. And for that, we have a policy. Using policy, I can also control it. Okay, so, but we will configure this rule. Create rule. And let's go to rule logic. I just want to see the query, that what is the threshold in the query. Okay, here's the query. In the query, you can see that they are typing the CPU count for the virtual machines which they consider as expensive. You can see virtual machines with 416 CPU, 208 CPUs, 44 CPUs, G5, G4. This is what they are providing in the query. So if you feel that you may want to add more virtual machine sizes here, or you want to remove one of these sizes because that is needed by your environment. For example, your company is using SAP. Your company is deploying SAP or doing a POC for SAP, and SAP requires higher size virtual machine, and you've identified a virtual machine size for it. You can remove that size from here. So that's what is there in the query. Okay, just save this query. Great. I hope other participants are following and doing this exercise, simultaneously as Quinton is doing. Okay, so we are good with this. We've enabled this query. We'll enable a couple of more queries from activity log itself. Okay, so creation of expensive layer subscription level operations, NRT Azure Active Directory, suspicious number of resource creation, deployment of Azure Active Directory, suspicious granting of permission of an account, which is similar, suspicious granting of permission to an account. So those are hunting queries we talk about later. Click on suspicious granting of permission to an account. I want to see what logic they have. Now, the reason we are looking at these queries, because what happens today, you see 11 queries here. There's a high probability that a week later, when you log in to this solution, you might find 20, because there's a team which is working day and night to enhance the capability of Sentinel by bringing in out of the box solution as much as possible, so that customers would not depend on custom rules. Customer would not end up creating custom rules. And how that team knows that what solution they need to add based on the feedback that they receive from the customer. So this says identified IPs from which user grants access to other users on Azure resources and alerts when previously unseen source IP address is used. So it says it will identify IP addresses from which user grants access to other users on Azure resources and alerts when a previously unseen source IP is addressed. So which means typically the administrators who have the capability of assigning access on Azure resources to various users, they are doing that activity from their official device, right? And their official device has the same IP address. However, if somebody grants an access to to a user on Azure resource from an unknown IP address, all of a sudden, for example, let's say there are 20 admins in the organization, they all are granting they all are granting access to other users from India. Now, all of a sudden, somebody has granted administrative access or contributor role to another user, but the IP address is traced from Russia, from Siberia, then it could be a potential security incident. And that is what this query is going to check. So create this rule. And you can quickly trigger an alert or incident from this rule by creating a virtual machine, let's say in Europe, and then log into Azure portal from that virtual machine, and then grant one of the user access to one the resources in Azure. Then the next moment, log in from your ID on another virtual machine, which is in Australia, in a different geography, and then grant another user or the same address, same user some additional access on Azure. And this will constitute the incident. That's exactly what is happening. So it says let's
Do we
time
need
is
to
14
change the
days. So what it
thresholds
checks,
there?
sorry?
Do we need to change these thresholds?
Yeah, we will need to change. So what it says that it will check in the last 14 days. In the last 14 days, it will check. So this threshold basically means that in the last 14 days, this is how so understand the logic here. The logic is that my admins are limited. I have 10 admins in my organization. They are doing their job most of the time from the office or from their home. So Active Directory has the information about the office network as well as home network also. It has the IP address. Now today, all of a sudden, from Russia, an admin account is granting access to another user. This is an anomaly. And how it checks the anomaly? Start time is 14 days. What it will do, it will check that in the last 14 days, has this IP address been used in the past or not? So it will not find that IP address because this IP address is only being used once. That's how it will capture the anomaly. Then it says let end time. End time is 1 day, which means that whatever that activity was done on a specific day, and after that it never repeated. So that's the end time. And then it says number of alert operations threshold. So alert operation threshold is that how many times that activity should happen before it constitutes an alert, before Sentinel generates an alert. It says 5, which means if that happens 5 times on the same day in the last 14 days, then it will constitute an alert. So 5 times instead of 5, I want to do it once. Even if this activity happens once, I would like an alert and incident to get generated. So the threshold you need to check, you need to change as 1. Okay, then comes, so what is this summarize operator failed? Did you make some changes to the query, Quinton? Go to summarize in the query, some not right.
I didn't make any changes.
Okay,
Not
then
same for me as well.
Okay, which means, so that is what I'm saying. Maybe this is a new query. So you will need to put information, go to summarize. It says summarize operator failed to resolve table or column expression. So you're actually putting this information into a specific table, and that operator has some issues. So go to summarize directly, or the right approach. I'm saying the right approach is to copy this query into a notepad.
Yep, I'll do that.
And then you can search for summarize. That is the right approach. Yeah. Okay, now search summarize. Okay, there are multiple times. Summarize count by caller IP address, caller bin, which is okay. Summarize start time. Summarize argmax, summarize assignment count by caller. Okay. I will need to look into this basically. So let's move on. I would say let's not spend time here. We have more to accomplish. So we'll need to check this actually. Okay. Now, what are we going to do? Let's go to other solution and let's see if there are any analytics rule before we create some custom analytics rule. So Amazon, we are not doing it because you don't have access. Azure Active Directory, we are done. Activity, we are done. Identity protection is not enabled, so no point of doing it. Azure Logic App, leave it. Go to Azure Network Security Group and see if there are analytics rule, because this is very important. There is no analytics here, right? Okay, that's okay. No worries. Now let me share some custom analytics rule that we typically create in a production environment. Uh, I'm saying the default out of the box rules are equally important. They give you a lot of insights, but they may not be sufficient. And since this is a lab environment, we don't also have multiple services here so that we get more analytics rule. So whatever you want to enable, you can enable, but let's create another analytics rule for the same brute force attack, but we want to use a different logic here. Okay, so now that you have seen all the participants, now that you have seen that how do we enable out of the box threat detection rules in Sentinel portal. This is what you have seen. These are the out of the box rules. They are pre-configured. You don't need to make much efforts. You just need to enable the rules or install the rules, save the rules. That's what out of the box. But out of the box will not be sufficient because I may have some specific monitoring requirements for which out of the box rules are not sufficient or out of the box rule is not available. For example, I want to capture brute force attack in a different manner, not the way Microsoft Azure is proposing. So, and this is how we do in most of the production environment. So I'll give you the query. Let's click on a custom rule. So let's click on analytics. Now I'll show you how do we build a custom analytics rule. Okay. In the analytics rule, click on create on the top and select the schedule query rule. So now we are creating a custom rule. This is how we create a custom rule. And this is the task of admin. Admins are supposed to identify the monitoring requirements or threat detection requirements and then build custom rules accordingly. So we are going to build a custom rule here. So name of the rule, you can put brute force attack on Azure portal. Brute force attack on Azure portal. Okay. In the description, you can write and say brute force attack. The query rule identifies whenever there is a brute force attack on Azure portal, whatever you want to type. That's internal to you. Great. All right. Severity is high once again. In text, tactics and techniques, you can always leave blank. I'm saying it's not a mandatory field, but we can at least put some information so that we can identify. Click on tactics and techniques and put initial access. Select tactics and techniques from the drop down. Okay, initial access, select initial access. In the initial access, select external remote hardware, phishing, weekly supply chain, trusted, valid accounts. Okay, and select the other one, which is defense invasion. So this is just we are selecting. I'm saying it hardly makes any difference here, in which you can put hijack artifacts, hijack execution flow. There is an option that says hijack execution flow. Somebody is trying to hijack. Exploitation of defense invasion, the one on the above, exploitation of defense information. Great. So that's how we select it. Move on. Let's go to next, set rule logic. Okay. Now this is where you need to type the query. So I'll share the query with you guys. I'll put the query in the chat window. Okay, copy the query from the chat and type it on a notepad. Copy it on a notepad from the chat. Okay. All right. Can you increase the font? I just want to see it and explain it, that what this query is. Okay. And I'll also share one article that how do I take this information.
Yeah, the font's increased.
Just give me 1 minute. I'm just looking for the right article.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great, got it. Error codes. This is another article that you need. Okay, let's open this article. Okay. So in this article, scroll it down. You will see all the authorization error codes. When somebody tries to sign in or somebody tries to authenticate and authorize to Azure, any of the Azure service, be it Azure portal, be it Azure Active Directory, be it Azure SharePoint Online, Azure Dynamics, any Azure PaaS or SaaS service that is managed and maintained by Azure Active Directory, if somebody tries to sign in, when that sign in is successful or failed, there is a log that gets created. And in that log, you will see a sign in code, sign in or failure code. Scroll down. Scroll the document down. You will see the sign in codes there. Quinton, I don't see you scroll it now. Okay. Okay. This is the error codes. Azure Active Directory Security Token Service error codes. These are the error codes. Okay. Now go back to the query and look at the error code that I have selected into the query. And this is how you can also write a custom query. Okay, in the query, you can see I am looking for sign-in logs where the result type, where the error code is 50.126.50.126, or the result type is 50053. Now let's go back to the documentation and see what 50126 and 50053 means here. You can directly do a control F and search for it. Did you get it? Yeah, great. Great. All right. See, whenever a sign-in log returns an error code as 50126, it basically means that it's an invalid username or password. That somebody is trying to attempt to sign in using an invalid username or password, right? And this is what typically hackers do. They use a combination of username and password to get successful. So that was 50126. What was the other one? Look for the other one. Okay. Then my other one is 50053, which basically means that somebody is trying to sign in from an IP address which is blacklisted, which the cyber threat intel engines across the world, Microsoft has one, AWS has another, there are multiple, which the cyber threat intelligence engine has identified as a blacklist IP address. Give me a moment, I'll be right back. Okay. So we are at this error code. Now this is very important because most of the time when there was a brute force attack reported in the past, the error code was this, because either they were trying to sign in from a lock account, the account which was already locked, or they were trying to sign in from an IP address which was reported to exhibit malicious activities. So that is why we have taken these two error codes. If you feel that you will need to I would say you will need to make it more comprehensive, make this query more comprehensive. You can type more error codes also in the query. But right now, I'm only taking these two error codes because they are more than sufficient to, to basically constitute a brute force attack. Or if you feel, you can take the other error code, which is 50056, that says invalid or null password, which says password doesn't exist in the directory. Right? So you can also add that error code. Or you can add the error code which is 50057, which is user disabled. But for user disabled, we have a separate analytics rule that we have configured, which is attempt to sign in from a disabled account. So this document will basically help you to put together a query, make it as comprehensive as possible when you are trying to configure the brute force attack on Azure portal threat detection rule, a custom threat detection rule, because the one that is out of the box is not that great, cannot capture all the brute force attacks or the different natures of brute force attack. So this is the purpose of sharing this documentation with you. This will help you in future also. Okay, let's go back to the query. Now let me help you understand what that query is. So my query says that whenever the sign-in logs, the result is 50126 or 50053. This is what you need to identify. You need to identify the location, the IP address, the time of that incident, the user display name, the one who is trying to do it, and then the user principal name. This is what you need to identify. And then how do you need to summarize it? Summarize is where you basically put the entity mapping. So summarize is that if it is ID, inside the ID, you will need to put the user principal name. Inside IPs, you will need to put the IP addresses. Inside locations, you will need to put the location. Inside UPN, you need to put the user display name, which is UPN, by the identity information. Now the condition. What is my condition? The condition is that the IP has to be more than one, and the location is similar to IP and sort by the IP. Now this is how I am putting the logic. My logic is that, for example, Quinton is in Australia. Now Quinton tries to sign in to Azure portal, and by mistake, Quinton types an incorrect password. Incorrect password is 50126. Then next time when Quinton sign in after 3-4 attempts, Quinton is able to sign in because now Quinton realizes that the caps lock was on the keyboard, because of which password was getting incorrect all the time, or some key from the keyboard was not working properly. Quinton realizes it and Quinton is able to sign in. Does this constitute a brute force attack? No. If I consider this as a brute force attack, then if I have 20,000 employees in my company, my security team will get at least 10,000 or 5,000 or 100 security incident every day. Because this happens most of the time, we are not getting the right password in the very first attempt. sometimes the password is so complex that while we type it, we get it incorrect. So this query has evolved over a period of time from my experience. Now, the logic that I'm putting is here, the logic is that if Quentin is signing in and is successful or is not successful, but the very next moment, maybe an hour later, somebody is trying to sign in using the same ID, or Quentin is trying to sign in from America. And then the next moment, an hour later, Quentin is signing from Japan. Now, Quentin cannot be in Japan, America, and Australia within a gap of 1 hour. It is not possible. This constitutes a brute force attack, because if this happens, then this is a brute force attack probably triggered by bot, which is the method that hackers use today. They have bots. So if there is an identity that tries to sign in from different locations, different IP addresses within a specific time frame, whether they are successful, whether they are failed, I don't care. It constitutes a brute force attack, because this cannot be possible. I cannot be at 3 places at the same time within a difference of 1 hour. Because if I want to take a flight from Australia to US or to India or Japan, it will take at least a couple of hours, even if I have my private jet. I cannot reach from one location to another within an hour. This is the logic that I have put together. And this is the same analytics rule. This is the same query that I have configured at most of the banks that I do consulting for. So this is what I'm sharing with you. Okay, let's copy this query and create a rule from this query. Okay, great. Now, if you type the query results, you will not get nothing right now, because nothing will satisfy this query, but you can click on query results and see if you're getting any result. See, you're not getting the result because the query has IP address as the parameter. Even if there was a user who was trying to sign in and the user failed, and then the user got succeeded, or the user continued to remain failed or succeeded, but that happened only from one IP address. So that is why it will not result. But let's go ahead and configure this query more. So after you provide this information, then comes the next, which is, okay, give me a moment, I lost the screen. Okay, then comes the entity mapping. Let's go to entity mapping and let's put the entity mapping now. So in the entity mapping, I will start with account. So first is my account. Select account. And then in the account, I will start with name, and name will be mapped to ID, because ID is where the display name is for the user. So name is mapped to the ID. Then comes the IP address. My next entity is IP address. I want to capture the IP address. And in the IP address, I will use address as the key and the value as IPs, because that's what my query will capture. So address and then IP, because IP will contain the IP address. You can see in the query, IP is equivalent to IP address. Then my third is again IP once again. My third is IP, third entity. You should at least keep 3 entities in your analytics rule, so that it becomes easier for your threat responders or your solutions team to investigate that threat, investigate that incident, so that they don't have to unnecessarily go to the source and find the logs. Okay, in the IP, you will type the address, not address scope, and which is location, because based on the IP, I'm generating the location also. Great. So these are the 3 entities that I'm keeping here. So we are good with the entities. We are good. We don't put anything in the custom details or alert details. Let's go to the query scheduling. Now, by default, this query runs every 5 hours and it captures the data of the last 5 hours, which is okay. You can keep it 1 hour, 2 hour, whatever time frame, but as per the production environment rule, you should not run query once in a day. In a production environment, typically this query runs at least once in an hour or twice, or let's say once in 2 hours. That's the maximum time frame, because if there's a brute force attack happening on my environment, what is the point I come to know about it next day when the query runs? I need to know instantly, and the minimum time frame is 1 hour. So I will either keep it 1 hour or I will keep it 2 hours, let's say, whatever. Okay. You don't want to
You,
keep
you
it in
said the
minutes?
minimum. You said the minimum is 1
Uh,
hour, but you could do minutes, right?
Yeah, minutes is also there, but then the challenge is the pricing. I don't
Yes.
want to run this query on minutes basis. Otherwise, I will end up paying more to Azure. So I also need to keep the cost in consideration. So that is why a minimum we always do 1 hour. We don't go beyond 1 hour. Okay,
Okay.
let's move on. Then start automatically. It will run start automatically, which is great. Then the alert threshold. Now my alert threshold is 0. Once again, even if I find one outcome of this query, that one outcome is a brute force attack for me. Okay, group all alerts into single, group all events into single alert, which is good. I don't want to suppress this query. So if this query creates an alert, this query will not stop running. It will continue to run. It should not happen that query creates an alert and then alert is being investigated. While the alert gets investigated, the query will not run. No, the query must run every hour and look at the data. So suppression rule will be off here. Next. Next is incident settings. Yes, I want to generate incident from this query for sure, which is good. It is enabled. Rest of it, you can keep it disabled. Why I'm keeping the alert grouping disabled? Because there could be a probability that there's a brute force attack from one ID, and then a minute later or 10 minutes later, 1 hour later, there is another ID which is a brute force attack is generated from another ID. So if I keep alert logging as if I enable the alert grouping, then it will not generate any other alert. So I will keep it disabled. Okay. Then comes automated response. As I said, we are not focusing on automated response as of now. Our focus is to more build the analytics rule, both out of the box as well as custom for our operations team to start working with. Automation will come later on. When the operation team complains that they are low in numbers, there are more incidents, and we need to bring in some automation to take care of some recurring or repetitive incidents. Okay. Next, review and create. And save it. Did you save it, Quentin? Okay, great. So this analytics tool also got saved. Now, once it displays in the analytics dashboard, you will see the source of this rule will be custom because it's something that you have created from scratch. You can search for the rule and then you will see the source name as custom. Search for the rule, whatever rule name, it's there, custom content. It's there on the top. Okay, so this is the rule that we have created. Now, how will this rule generate incident? When you will have an ID trying to sign in from two different locations. So how can you simulate the attack? You can simulate the attack by using an ID and try to sign in with that ID from this portal, I mean say from your laptop, and then also open an Azure virtual machine which is configured in other location. Example, Quentin, you are in Australia. So you can sign in from your laptop and try to sign in by providing an incorrect ID, incorrect password, and then provision another VM in US in Azure and log into that VM and then use the same ID to sign in. and then use the incorrect password once again. And if you do that twice, one from your laptop, the other from a VM in US or any other location other than India, then the query will satisfy. Query will get 50026 sign-in log for the failed sign-in from two different locations, which is Australia and US. And if that happens, it will quickly generate an alert stating that there's a brute force attack on the port. So this is how you will simulate the attack so that the query creates an incident. I'll be right back. All right, Quinton, while this VM is getting created, let's create some additional analytics rule that is important. So we have created analytics rule to identify brute force attack on Azure portal. Similarly, there could be a brute force attack on my virtual machines also. Virtual machine is one of my critical service, and there is a probability of brute force attack on my virtual machines, which are public facing. For example, my web servers. Web servers are typically configured with public IPs. So I may have a high probability of brute force attack on my virtual machines configured with public IP. So how do I detect a brute force attack on my virtual machine, which is a common, threat detection rule configured in most of the production environment. So let's just go ahead and do it. So let's go to analytics rule. Let's create another custom analytics rule to identify brute force attack on a virtual machine resource in Azure. Okay. Let's go to analytics. Let's create another analytics rule to identify brute force attack on my virtual machines. Okay. You can type the name as brute force attack on virtual machine. On virtual machine. Now, it is not that this virtual machine only means Azure virtual machine. This could be any virtual machine which is connected to the log analytics workspace, which is sending the event logs to the log analytics workspace. Now, in our case, we have virtual machines in Azure sending the logs to the log analytics workspace. But the outreach of this rule is to all the virtual machines which are sending logs to log analytics workspace. Okay, so you can keep the severity as medium, high, whatever you feel. Tactics, this is typically type of initial access, or you can say, so I'm saying it's totally up to you whether you want to put it. Okay, so just select the appropriate tactics that you feel and move on. This will only help you in reporting purpose. When you do the reporting, you can send the management report based on the type of attacks based on various tactics. Okay, let's move on to the rule logic. And here you need to put this query. I'll put the query in the chat. Copy the query from the chat. Okay, so this is my query. Now you need to understand what is event ID 4625. So for the same, you can search it on the internet. 4625 basically means repetitive attempt to log into a virtual machine using incorrect password. That's what this query is all about. And then you will not get the result of this query because you have hardly logged into any virtual machines. And also, whenever you logged in, you always provided the right password. So for this query to work, you will need to log into virtual machines with incorrect password. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let's go to entity mapping, which is very important here. In in the entity mapping, we will select host, not account, host. And host is what? My host name. And host name is what? My virtual machine name, which is the computer name. Great. So we'll get to know that which host is getting compromised. Next is account. Who is
Which one was
compromising
that?
that host? So click on the next
You're
entity is
breaking up
account.
a little bit. Account?
Okay. So the
Sorry.
yeah, account, absolutely. And in the account, you will type the name of the user. So type name, and you will put username here. That with which username the computer is getting compromised. And then comes the resource ID. Sorry, Azure resource. Azure resource. And here you will type the resource ID. You will select the resource ID in both the column so that you will know the resource ID of it. See, even if you only get the computer name, there's a high probability you will not be able to search it, but the resource ID will give you the FQDN of that resource. It will start with the Azure AD tenant, then the subscription ID, then the resource group, then the resource type, and then to the resource ID. So these are the three entities that I'm putting here. Okay. Then comes the query scheduling. Which is I want to run this, let's say every, since this is brute force attack, I'm saying 1 hour, 2 hour, whatever you want to keep it, you can keep it. Okay, start automatically. Alert threshold is greater than 0. Alert threshold is greater than 0 is for most of the analytics rules, because the moment you get an outcome of the query, that outcome qualifies for an alert, and then alert qualifies for an incident. Same process that you will follow. Next, incident settings, which is good. You create incidents from this alert. Next, automated response. In the automated response, we will leave it now. We'll do automated response probably later. And then review and create. Okay. So this alert rule also got created. So we've got it for virtual machines. Now that virtual machine includes both Linux and Windows OS VM, because we have not initially specified whether the attempt is on port 389, whether the attempt is on port 22. So which means it includes both. However, in some organizations, they have separate rules for RDP and for SSH. So they create separate brute force attack rule on VMs, one for RDP, one for SSH. Here we have just created one, which is more than sufficient for me. Okay. So that was my another analytics rule. Then there is one more analytics rule, which is very important for the virtual machine itself. Now, let's say I have a database virtual machine. Okay. Now, typically my database virtual machine will be in a segment which is isolated from the internet. I will never ever have that segment accept traffic from the internet. So it's like a database subnet, and that subnet is not allowed to accept traffic from the internet, which means you will not have any rule front-ending that subnet or that VM which is accepting traffic from the internet. That is the default expectation. And what happens sometimes, you will see that there is an incident in the environment, and that incident will actually expose the entire segment or a specific virtual machine to the internet by making modifications to the NSG rule. So we also have a threat detection rule configured in most of the production environment, wherein we monitor the modifications to network security groups or security groups in AWS and GCP. So let's create another analytics rule, threat detection rule, that will monitor if there has been any modifications to a specific NSG or to all the NSGs. Because we create NSGs once and we hardly make changes to the NSGs. But whenever we make changes to the NSGs, my rule should create an incident. I should get notified. Maybe the priority severity of that incident could be low, but I should get notified. This is also one of the common production rule that we create in Sentinel for most of the environment. So let's create this alert.
The name?
You can put the name as network security group modification, network security group modified, kind of whatever you want to put. Network security group modified. Yeah, network security group being modified, that's okay. All right, severity, we can keep it medium. You can say modifications made of network security group for inbound and outbound rules. So whenever there is a modification, whether it's an inbound rule, whether it's an outbound rule, for example, the databases are not allowed to browse the internet. So there is an outbound rule which is blocking the outbound traffic to internet from the database subnet. But somebody modified the network security rule, network security group, and deletes that rule, or change the action of that rule from deny to allow. So I'm trying to say any modifications made to the network security group, I should be able to see it. So this will come under infiltration, exfiltration.
Exfiltration.
Yeah. Automated exfiltration. And exfiltration over other network medium. And the last one, okay. I'm saying you can keep anything. That's totally okay.
And the last one is?
The last one is transfer data to cloud account. Because what happens, this is what we have seen in the past. When network security groups modified on the VMs, after the modification was done, some data was stolen from the VM. So let's say if it's a database server, if it is not allowed to connect to the internet, the hacker would modify the network security group and then upload the data from the database to a cloud account or to an external storage over the internet. So that's the another transfer data cloud account. Okay, great. Next. Go to rule logic and I'll share the query. Now this information will come from where? This information will come from the activity log. So the Azure activity log will capture all the activities that happens on Azure resources. Whenever it captures an activity, I put that into the chat window. You can copy it from there. So whenever it captures that there is an activity on the network security group, which has modified the properties of a network security group, it will quickly, alert you. It will quickly create a log, and Sentinel will read that log and create an alert. So you can see it says the resource provider is Microsoft Network, and you can see activity status value is success. So whenever it says success, it means there has been some modification. Now you can expand this query when you want to restrict this query. For example, right now this query will run for all the network security group. But if you know the specific network security groups which are critical, or if you know the specific virtual machines which are critical, you can expand this query and include them also in summarize by. So right now I'm just keeping it very simple for all the participants. So this is the simple query that the rule will run. The query will return if there has been any modification done to a network security group. And if that is the case, then it will quickly generate an alert. Okay. You will not get it any information right now because you have not modified any network security. Okay. Let's go to the alert entity mapping, which is very important. In the entity mapping, you will use account. And in the account, you will use name. Name is the caller. I will say the person who is calling this activity who has done this. Okay. Next is IP. Next is IP.
Yep, done.
And in IP, you will select once again address. Address is caller IP address. So you will know who that caller, which IP address that caller is doing this activity from. Next is host. Host, and on the host, you will select host name. Host name basically means that for which resource ID, and you will select resource ID here. So you will get to know that which network security group out of thousands of or out of 20,000 network security groups in this account is got modified. So this is more than sufficient, because when you are now understand when you're investigating this incident, what you need to know, who did it, from which IP address, and which resource, on which resource. That's what you need to know, because with this information, you will come to know the impact of it. If that resource ID happens to be a network security group fronting the database segment, you will know that this is critical. Okay. Then comes the same query scheduling. You may want to run it every so typically what we do in a production environment to minimize the log volume or to minimize the number of alerts and pricing from Sentinel, we typically run query, typically run query every 6 hours, 5 hours or 6 hours, which is the default. That's why Sentinel always keeps the default as 5 hours. But in our case, we can do it 2 hours, 1 hour. Okay. The rest of the information will remain the same as we have done. So you can just save this query now. We will never do the alert grouping, because if we do the alert grouping, then we will be able to minimize the number of incidents, but there is a high probability that we may skip or we may overlook one of the critical incidents, because incidents are grouped into one incident, or multiple alerts are grouped into one alert that creates an incident. So grouping is not recommended. Okay, great. So now we have this alert rule also. That is another. Now one last that we want to configure is, there is one more that I find very important in the environment, which is we have a couple of services in Azure which is public in nature. So let me take the control for a moment. Quinton.
I can't do control.
So I have taken the control.
So you on your screen. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, on my okay. Now we have done a couple of rules. For example, is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. So we have done this rule, which is brute force attack on RDP. We have done this rule, which is brute force attack on Azure portal, custom as well as out of the box. We have created both out of the box and custom both. Now this is what we are going to create. We have created this rule also, that whenever a network security group is modified for a VM, we've also created Azure activity logs rules. You have created 1 or 2 rules from activity log also. Now let's understand this private endpoint. So what happens in Microsoft Azure, we have a couple of services which have public endpoint. When I say public endpoint, it basically means that services are accessible over public network. Now, what are those services? Storage account. Storage account is a public service in Azure. I can build a storage account, upload some data into the storage account, and then I can have that data accessible to people. I can share it with people and they can access it online over the public network. App services. App service, which is another PaaS service from Azure. I can create an app service and I can make it accessible over the internet. So that's app service. Similarly, we have multiple services. For example, okay, what happened? Okay, then we have Azure SQL PaaS. This is another service that is public in nature. Similarly, we have Microsoft 365 also. Microsoft 365 mailboxes, you can open it over the internet from any device by default, right? So I'm just giving you some example. There are more services that supports, that supports, private endpoint. These services have public endpoint. Now, it basically means that by default, these services are accessible over the internet, but in a production environment, when I create a storage account to upload some data, and I want that data to be only accessible by a specific service from my network. Now, I have an application which is configured on a VM. VM is part of a subnet. Subnet is part of a virtual network. And virtual network is part of a subscription. Subscription is part of a tenant. And tenant belongs to a customer. Okay, this is the hierarchy. Now, this application needs to store some data. The requirement from this application is that it wants to store some data and retrieve it as and when needed. That's the requirement from the application. Now, there are two options to do this. I can store the data on a disk which is connected to the VM, or I can store the data in a storage account also, in a container, part of a storage account. These are my two options. And I end up choosing the other option because the other option is cost effective. So I end up choosing the other option. The reason I'm not choosing the first option because the disk has more cost than container service and storage account. Second, I want, what if this disk is compromised? What if this VM is compromised? I may not be able to access the data. So I want to keep the data on a separate service. That is why I'm keeping the data in a storage account. So I'm storing the data into a container. Okay. Now, when I store the data into a container, I have one more expectation that I don't want this storage account where the data is stored should be accessible over the internet. I want to restrict the access of the storage account to my virtual network only, so that the storage account is only accessible from this virtual network, from this subnet, and only this VM should be able to access the data. This is my requirement. This is one of the use case. Now, to satisfy this use case, what I will do, I will configure a private endpoint for the storage account. And when I will configure the private endpoint for the storage account, I will basically provide that where exactly I want my storage account to be accessible from. So I select my virtual network in subnet, and storage account will only be accessible from the private endpoint, which means the public endpoint of the storage account will be disabled. This is an example of private endpoint for a public service. Same is the case for the Azure SQL Pass. I have a database that I've configured in SQL Pass, and I want that Pass database to be only accessible from this VM. So what I'll do, I'll configure a private endpoint for Pass database so that it is only accessible from the VM and not from anywhere else, which basically means disabling the public endpoint and enabling the private endpoint. So private endpoint is a security service, right? Now, this private endpoint is configured in most of the production environment for public service. Private endpoint is configured for public services to restrict access from public networks. And now what happens, let's say this is configured for one of my database VM. Okay. Now I have a database virtual machine in Azure for which database virtual machine, and this is my SQL Pass DB. And for this SQL Pass DB, I have configured the private endpoint, which means the access to this database is only available from my Azure network. And also, I have an NSG configured here, which is known as firewall rules in case of a database, network and firewall rules. And that NSG is also preventing any access from the internet and is also preventing access to this database from any other network or from any other VM. So I have a dual layer of protection configured here. My SQL database is configured for private endpoint as well as is protected by an NSG firewall rule. Now, what will happen when somebody wants to hack into my database? The very first thing that they will do is to change the firewall rules, which is change in NSG that you have already configured in the previous rule. Whenever there's a change in NSG, an incident will be created. That's the first rule that you have configured. After the NSG will be changed, they will delete the private endpoint. When the private endpoint will be deleted, they can easily they can easily access the database, and they can also copy the data from the database to an external network because the private endpoint is disabled. So when we created a rule for NSG, we will also create another rule for private endpoint. So this is what we are going to build. So my logic is that whenever a private endpoint is deleted for a service, now here I can restrict my rule by providing the service name by using the where switch, or I can do it for my entire environment. Private endpoint is a security service. If it ever gets deleted, I get notified as a security team. So what I will do, I will create an alert rule, a threat detection rule, which will notify me whenever a private endpoint is deleted for a service. That's my threat detection rule. So let's quickly configure this last rule also. And this is another custom rule that I am configuring is you don't have an out of the box rule for this. So I'll stop sharing now. Quentin, you can share your screen now. Okay. So guys, I would say for some of the participants, it could be a bit difficult to understand these concepts. And that is why if you want to be in Azure SOC monitoring, I'm saying if you want to be part of a SOC monitoring team and your product is Azure, you should have good knowledge of Azure services, configuration knowledge of Azure services, and the use cases of those services. Then only you will be able to justify your role. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for you to manage these services, because being in SOC monitoring team would not always mean to manage virtual machines. No, there is more in Azure. Other than virtual machines, you have multiple services, and for those services are equally critical. So you will also need to manage incidents around those services, and that is why it is very much needed for you to understand those services. So read about private endpoint if you could not understand when I explained it. Okay, so my rule is private endpoint is deleted. That is my rule. You can type any description. I'm say private endpoint of a service is deleted. Private endpoint of service. Okay. Okay. Private endpoint of a service is deleted. Great. I'll share the rule logic, the query with you. Now, guys, ideally, so I've already shared this feedback with Microsoft that they should include some additional out-of-the-box threat detection rules in Azure Activity, because there's a lot that we can get from Azure Activity. So this is also coming from Azure activity. Whenever a private endpoint is deleted, an Azure activity log will be created. A log in Azure activity will be created, and we'll pick up the log from there, and we'll create a rule. So you can see Azure activity where the operation name is Microsoft Network Private DNS Zone A delete, which is equivalent to private endpoint. Whenever it gets deleted, quickly pick up who has deleted it, which resource ID, I'm saying which specific endpoint got deleted, and who is the caller. So same concept in the entity. We will start with account, name as caller, then IP, and in IP address as caller IP address, and then Azure resource. I'm saying the specific resource for which this is done, which is resource ID is resource ID. Great, we are good. Just go with the default settings now. All right, so this rule is also saved. This is all that we want to do, unless and until you have any specific use case in mind that you would like to create a threat detection rule or an analytics rule for a custom analytics rule for. We are good to go. We have created, we have created 3 to 4 custom rules. We have created 3 to 4 out of the box rules. So I just wanted you to understand the concept that after you have collected all the data, after you have configured all the data sources in Sentinel, the next step is to configure the analytics rule. Next step is to tell Sentinel that what it needs to look for, what logic it needs to use, and how it needs to create incidents. So let's go to incidents and see that how many incidents have we created. Has it created so far? Okay, so you will see 2 incidents here. I also see a brute force attack incident. Let's see that incident. So it seems that there is a brute force attack on the portal. So probably, Quentin, you must have logged into a VM and tried to put that. This is brute force attack against Azure portal. This is the This is the default. Is this the default one or custom?
I think this is the default one.
Okay, this is the default one. So default one was easy, as I said, so this is the brute force attack that has happened. Can I see the query? What query did we put there? Go to not invest. You cannot see that from here. You will need to go to that analytics rule, then you will see it.
Okay, go back to the analytics.
Yeah. Which one was that? You have 2 brute force attack. Yeah, this one, right?
Yeah.
This is content source. So content source basically means that this is a default rule. And in this default rule, the query was, go to query, set rule logic. Next tab. Okay, this was the query. I just want to, so this was the query, which is, okay, so you put the attempt as 2. Okay, failure attempts as 2. So probably the user that you were trying to sign in from by typing the incorrect password, then it is a result of that user activity, right? Run the query result. Here in the put, yeah. So this attack is because of which user? Okay, just click on custom range. You need to put the custom range. And just put the last 4 hours. 4 hours. Okay, so this is because of Jazz. So yes, when you were trying to, so you can see failure 9. Scroll it to the right, and you will see how many times did this user try to log in. Failure count before success. So user tried to log in 9 times, and then on the 10th incident, the user was successful. This is what the default rule is. So that is where I do not like this default rule, because this default rules needs a success criteria also. Now, if the user is successful, then only it is not brute force attack. Even if the user is not successful, then also it is a brute force attack, because I need to know who is generating that attack, which ID is compromised, which are the public IP from where the attack is getting generated, so that I can put a conditional access policy in my Azure AD, and I can blacklist that ID. Now the question is, from where do we blacklist and whitelist the ID? Let's go to Azure Active Directory. Yeah, go to Azure Active Directory service. And here go to security. No, not the user. Security.
Security, sorry.
So for example, guys, now what will happen when these incidents come? What is the outcome of it? You investigate the incident. What do you investigate? You basically investigate who that ID is, and then you connect with that ID, and you came to know that ID was compromised. Now the keyword here is public IP. You will need to identify that public IP from where the attack got triggered, and you will need to blacklist that public IP, so that public IP is no more able to trigger the attack. That's the outcome of this incident investigation, because you will need to take remediation steps so that similar incidents will not come. That's what is an efficient SOC is all about. So what you will do, you will blacklist that public IP going forward from being able to log into your Azure portal, and that you will do from conditional access. So click on Azure AD conditional access. To your left, yeah, protect conditional access. Yeah. Over here underneath, under manage, it says named location. You can also see named location here. Under manage, there is an option that says named location. Yeah, click on this. This is the place where we configure the countries and IP address ranges. So if in DXC, or if for any other customer, if you ever find that you're not able to log into their service from your home, but from your office it works, this is where it is configured. So probably the customer has configured the named location in Azure portal, wherein you decide the countries and IP ranges. So let's say I only want my Azure portal or the applications configured in Azure portal accessible from my office network, not from anywhere in the world. What I will do, I will come to IP ranges location, click on IP ranges location. Did you click on it? Okay.
Yeah.
And here I will name this location. You can say office location, office address, whatever you want to keep. And then you will click on add. And here you can type the IP address of your office, the public IP of your office. There will be one public IP for the entire office premises, which is the IP that is configured on the edge router. You just need to type the public IP. Now what will happen? After typing this public IP, you will create a conditional access policy that will only allow access to Azure service, which is Azure portal, from this public IP. So this is what is configured in most of the companies, wherein their specific service is only accessible from a specific network, from not anywhere. Now this capability is known as CASB, Cloud Application Security Broker. So typically CASB solutions have this capability, in which you can use a CASB solution to restrict access from specific IPs and locations, from specific devices and signals, to a specific service. And CASB capability is part of Azure AD in the name of conditional access. So once again, I reiterate my statement that if you really want to be a great incident responder for Microsoft Azure using Sentinel or using any service, be it ArcSight or any service, you need to have good knowledge of Azure. Then only you can do justice to your role. Otherwise, you will just pick up the incident, pick up the details from the incident and send it to the L2 all the time. L2 happens to be the service manager or the service admin. So this is where we do it. So what will happen now? After the brute force attack is generated, you will investigate the brute force attack, and part of investigation, you will identify the IP. If you see that the same IP is being used time and again to trigger a brute force attack, you will share the IP with your Azure AD admin, and Azure AD admin will add that IP into a blacklisted IP. Right now, this is a office location. Similarly, you can click on add once again and add another IP. You will add that IP into a blacklisted IP, create a conditional access policy which will deny all future requests from that IP. And if the hacker uses other IPs, you will go to the same named location again and add another IP. So this way you will continue to evolve your named location, your blacklisted IP sheet, by adding all the IP addresses that had been reported in the past to trigger a brute force attack. This is how the coordination happens with the service team, between the service team and the monitoring team. That monitoring team gives them the input, and service teams, basically configures these services based on the input.
So is this
So that is all
this
that we want to do today.
This entry, is that both whitelist and blacklist? So you just tick it to whitelist something and you don't tick it to blacklist?
No. You will create two locations. I'm saying this is one location name, and then you will create another. Because if you click on check this box that says mark as trusted location, then what it will mean that if it has 20 entries, the entries that are marked as trusted location will only be allowed. So to avoid the confusion, what you will do, you will create two locations.
Right.
One is office location, example you created, create this IP, create it, and then create another IP ranges location after this, and you can put it a name as blacklisted IPs.
Okay.
Or locations. And while you create a conditional access policy, you will need to select that option. Select the named location. I'll show you real quick. So put a blacklisted, and now put an IP address here.
Yeah, so let's go 100.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Okay. So you can put an IP address range or a specific IP address. That is both allowed. Okay. This is a very huge range.
Yeah, it probably is. It didn't let me do a.
So you can do specific IP. You just need to type /32, which means the same IP.
Okay, yeah. So you have to still put the slash. Okay.
Yeah. In the CIDR block, type /32, which means the same IP. Yep. Okay. Great. Create it. Okay. Done. Now, after you created it, let's go to conditional access. Now, let's click on policies and create a policy. To your left, you see policies under overview. Policies on the top.
Yep.
Yeah. Great. Now, new policy. And here you will select the policy name. You can say deny access from blacklisted IPs. Great. Now in the users, go to users. The first is users. Zero user group. Yeah. This is how you create policy. Select users and group selected. Here select all users. All. So what you're selecting, that all the users, anyone in this world, that's what you're selecting. Then select the target.
Target. Yeah.
Your screen is not okay. In the target, you will in the target, you will select the Azure portal. Because see, if you select all, then it will include all. So I would like to select Azure portal only, that I don't want Azure portal to be accessible. To select app, and then it will show you a drop down where you can select Azure portal. Okay, great. Now here you will need to, okay, what it says, you do not have permission. Close it. There's an option to select app, but that's okay. I just want to help you understand the policy part. Select all cloud apps. Okay. We will not configure this policy, otherwise you will also be logged out. Okay, next. Okay, next is condition. Now this is where you will select the condition. In the condition, you will select location. And in the location, you will select yes, configure yes on the top. First configure. Yeah. Now select all trusted location or selected location. Select the selected location, the last one. And here you will select that blacklisted location. It will populate that blacklisted location.
Right.
Now select blacklisted one. Great. You've selected the location. Then you select the access, that what will happen, whether it will be allowed or denied. So here you will select deny, block access. That's it. Select it at the bottom. At the bottom under grant, there is an option to. Okay, great. That's it. So what you are selecting here is that any user who is trying to log into any cloud application from that location, and that location has an IP address or has multiple IP addresses, should not be allowed. The moment you will click this policy, nobody will be able to allow. Now, while you are creating this policy, there is a high probability that you may also get logged out, because you may also be trying to log in from that location. So that is why it says don't get yourself logged out, and it asks you to exclude yourself. If you are the owner of the account, then you can keep that radio button checked and this policy. So this is how a conditional access policy is created in the production environment as a result of an incident, as a result of a brute force incident. So the incident, the SOC team will inform the Azure AD team that, hey, you know what? We have identified a couple of IPs which have been reported to trigger brute force attack on our Azure tenant, Azure subscription. Here's the list of these IPs. Please go ahead and blacklist it. So what Azure AD security team will do, they will create a blacklisted location, and they will add all the IPs in that location, and they will create this conditional access policy to not allow anyone login from this IP. This is how you will continue to collaborate with the service teams, I'm saying Azure AD teams or network team or compute team, and you will continue to provide them inputs so that they can take appropriate actions. This is how security coordinates with service team. Make sense?
Excellent. Yep, sure does.
Okay. I'm open to questions, guys, if you have any. I can understand for some of the participants, today's session will, could be a bit difficult, wherein we created the out-of-the-box rules, we created custom rules, and we also looked at various Azure services nitty-gritty. But with more practice, you will get a good comfort level. So the entire session recorded. If you feel that you were not able to understand the specific portion, you can refer it from the session recording. Even if you don't understand it, just make a note of it and then ask and discuss it with me first thing in the morning tomorrow.